Imagine a profound enigma. Beneath Egypt's scorching sun, Christian knights, bearing the distinctive red cross of the Templars, venture into a subterranean realm shunned by all locals. This is not Jerusalem, but Giza, and their discovery defies every known Crusader chronicle. It is neither relic nor bone, but something far more ancient. Something seemingly impossible. What if the Knights Templar unearthed a secret beneath the pyramid so monumental that it not only reshaped their esoteric rituals but also threatened the very authority of the church itself? And what if their eventual persecution stemmed not from greed, but from this revelation? Allow yourself a moment to absorb this premise. Let the conventional narratives recede like desert sands. The truth you are about to encounter is not enshrined in official histories. It is etched in stone, whispered through decaying ruins, and partially obscured by the relentless march of time, yet it persistently surfaces. Typically, the Templars are confined to the battlefields of the Holy Land, to Jerusalem and a desperate struggle for sacred artifacts. But what if their true quest extended beyond these maps, into the heart of Egypt? Not as conquerors, nor as mere pilgrims, but as silent seekers, men driven by a search for knowledge far older than Scripture itself. Our journey tonight bypasses the fabled Ark or the Holy Grail. Instead, we descend into the unrecorded tunnels beneath Giza's ancient stone colossi, into chambers guarded by an eternal trinity of silence, sand, and time. You will learn of scrolls clandestinely transported to Europe, of rituals meticulously copied from torchlit walls, and of a profound alchemy blending the cross with the ankh. Our inquiry tonight is not into the Templars' fall, but into their initial, groundbreaking discovery. To ensure you uncover every suppressed detail and forgotten truth, subscribe now. Do not allow history's most potent secrets to remain buried. They were never meant to be there. When the Knights Templar first emerged in the wake of the First Crusade, their mandate was clear: protect Christian pilgrims, secure vital routes, and defend the Holy Land. Egypt lay beyond this directive, too distant, too culturally alien, too fraught with political complexities. Yet, subtle whispers from within Crusader chronicles and often overlooked Arabic sources suggest that Templar detachments penetrated Egyptian territory far earlier and with greater frequency than commonly acknowledged. The prevailing historical narrative situates them firmly within Jerusalem, Acre, and Antioch. However, an intriguing anomaly appears in logistical records from the mid-12th century. Supply caravans, ostensibly bound for Palestine, inexplicably diverted through the Nile Delta. Horses, specifically bred for desert warfare, were suddenly being transported across the Sinai. Templar symbols surfaced in port. Manifests at Damietta and Alexandria ports, supposedly inaccessible due to ongoing hostilities. Most tellingly, a few captured Templars during early skirmishes in Egypt were found to carry documents inscribed in Coptic, not Latin. Official church histories, of course, swiftly dismissed these records as misattributions or battlefield confusion. Yet, the consistency and patterned nature of these occurrences demand closer scrutiny. Even respected Muslim chroniclers such as Ibn al-Athir and al-Makrizi made fleeting references to white-cloaked Franks traversing Egyptian deserts, not as belligerents but as guests or perhaps even as students. Let us be clear, Egypt was no casual playground for crusaders. The Fatimid Caliphate and later Saladin's Ayyubid dynasty maintained formidable control. However, 12th century political alliances were rarely purely ideological. Power was the ultimate currency, and knowledge, especially hidden knowledge, could be traded as readily as gold. It is entirely plausible that certain Templar commanders, potentially operating beyond direct church oversight, forged discreet arrangements with Egyptian officials or esoteric circles. Here lies the pivotal anomaly that compels historians to reconsider: the Templars' profound obsession with sacred geometry, mystical numerology, and arcane knowledge. Egypt, it must be noted, possessed an unparalleled abundance of such wisdom. If a knight secretly sought the profound insights of the ancients' astronomy that predated Galileo, medicine surpassing Hippocrates, or rituals older than Genesis, he would not journey to Rome. He would venture quietly to Cairo, and perhaps he would never return unchanged. One particularly obscure clue originates from a 12th century Templar inventory list recovered near Tyre, amidst entries for armor and incense. A single line reads, "Manuscript received from the black-robed one of Misr." Misr, of course, is the Arabic name for Egypt. No further explanation. A mere breadcrumb of a hint, dropped into the vast silence of history. This prompts a tantalizing question. What if the Templar missions into Egypt were not mere deviations, but their fundamental objective? What if Jerusalem served merely as a strategic cover story, while Egypt, the ancient land of tombs and timeless secrets, was the true treasure hunt? In a profound sense, this makes perfect logical sense. The Church would never sanction knights learning from infidels, let alone mystics. Therefore, any knowledge they acquired there would have to remain buried, either beneath the sand or woven into secret rites, passed discreetly from knight to knight. And if even a fraction of those rites were shaped by ancient Egyptian wisdom, then the entire structure of Templar ritual, from initiation to the enforced vow of silence, might owe as much to the Nile as to Nazareth. That profound silence, maintained both by the knights themselves and by the church that later condemned them, might be the most compelling proof we possess. For men rarely remain silent unless the truth is too perilous to speak or too sacred to betray. One might persuasively argue that Egypt was never a detour. It was the ultimate destination, and what lies beneath its pyramids may have transformed the Templars far more profoundly than any sword ever could. It began with an obscure footnote, one of those overlooked archival details most historians readily dismiss. A 13th century letter, attributed to a Templar scribe stationed near Gaza, referenced a papyrus scroll inscribed with sacred diagrams received from a Coptic intermediary near Al-Fustat. This letter, long considered a forgery, has recently resurfaced thanks to advanced digital preservation techniques. Suddenly, what once seemed like historical fiction now resonates with unsettling plausibility. The document, often simply termed the Cairo Letter, is remarkably concise, barely 3 paragraphs, yet its content hints at a clandestine exchange. A Templar officer named Hugo de Payens receives a bundle from the blind elder, wrapped in linen marked with a peculiar symbol, a circle nested within a triangle, tentatively linked by Templar symbology experts to early initiatory diagrams. The blind elder, described as a keeper of the wells beneath the stones, demands no payment, only absolute silence. Furthermore, the letter's phrasing includes references to those who predate the pharaohs and the House of the Horizon, a name strongly associated with the ancient Temple of Akhetaten, built by the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten and renowned for its unique solar theology. The presence of such terminology in a Latin letter written by a Knight of the Cross profoundly suggests that the Templars were not merely collecting maps or relics. They were being inexorably drawn into an entirely distinct cosmology. Modern Egyptologists have long debated the extent to which ancient esoteric knowledge persisted through Coptic transmission. While the prevailing mainstream view posits that the advent of Christianity eradicated the older practices, a growing minority believes that certain rites, prayers, and diagrams were quietly preserved, passed from priest to monk, cleverly repurposed into Christian metaphors, but never truly lost. The Templars, operating in profound secrecy and constantly seeking ancient mysteries, would have been ideal recipients for such transmissions, particularly if they promised spiritual power. Some critics dismiss the letter as a clever fabrication, perhaps a literary invention or a misinterpretation of a trade agreement. However, the physical characteristics of the document contradict such dismissals. The ink composition, parchment texture, and stylistic Latin script all align perfectly with 13th century standards. And then there is the watermark, a faint sigil, visible only under ultraviolet light, which precisely matches a seal found on an ostracon unearthed near Giza in 1904. Intriguingly, that ostracon contained not bones, but scorched scraps of papyrus, dismissed at the time as later additions, before the Cairo letter's rediscovery. Even more strangely, a marginal note on the back of the parchment, written in Arabic script, includes a chilling warning: "He who opens the vault will not survive the song." This has been interpreted as poetic flourish, or a reference to acoustic traps, known in certain tombs' resonant chambers designed to disorient intruders. Either way, it casts a long, ominous shadow over what the Templars might have unveiled. Recall that, in an earlier chapter, we noted the unexpected appearance of the Coptic language on Templar field documents. This papyrus letter, therefore, is not an isolated anomaly. It forms part of a larger, coherent pattern, a thread stretching across battles and borders, connecting knights to monks, pyramids to crosses. Perhaps the most disquieting element is what Hugo does not articulate. The letter concludes abruptly. No commentary, no exaltation, no fear. Merely this: we will not write again. The light beneath the stone has changed us. Changed us. The phrasing itself is haunting. Not enlightened, not empowered, but changed. And then, an absolute silence. To this day, no further correspondence from Hugo de Payens has ever been found. It is as if the letter marked not a beginning, but a final resonant breath. So what profound secret did the Templars decipher on that papyrus? What diagram, symbol, or incantation was so potent that it could silence a man's words? Some speculate the scroll mapped a hidden chamber beneath the Sphinx. Others suggest it contained fragments of a pre-Mosaic cosmology, one that seamlessly blended Egyptian solar worship with something far older. Yet perhaps, the specific content mattered less than its profound origin. It is easy to envision the Templars confined to the battlegrounds of the Holy Land, swords drawn, standards raised, fortresses bristling with defenders. But occasionally, a map reveals an oddity. A fortification where no crusade was declared. A structure overtly European for its surroundings. A glyph that aligns neither with Islamic architecture nor Coptic tradition. And Old Cairo, in particular, is replete with such anomalies for those who possess the discerning eye. Beneath the ceaseless modern traffic and bustling markets, the foundational bones of Fustat, the medieval capital of Islamic Egypt, still whisper. Among its ruins lies an easily overlooked wall, a peculiar stone segment discreetly tucked behind the church of St. Sergius, bearing the faint outline of a cross whose arms taper unnaturally. Its precise proportions undeniably match the Croix Patée, the iconic emblem of the Knights Templar. Locals have long considered it a mere crusader artifact, perhaps a repurposed stone. However, the true question is not what it is, but why it is there. Several structures in this ancient sector of Cairo exhibit floor plans inconsistent with indigenous Islamic design. Consider the so-called Red House, a two-story ruin featuring narrow, vertical arrow slits, an architectural element rare in Egypt, but nearly identical to those found in Templar strongholds in Tripoli. Its basement, what little remains, contains collapsed archways that descend into a vault, sealed with what some contend was once lead, long since plundered. Then there is the Tower of the Strangers, less a tower than a squat, enigmatic stone block with no documented origin. Its name derives from an Ottoman-era poem referencing foreign guardians who vanished with the sun. Excavations around it in the 1930s revealed tools not indigenous to the region. A Western-style spade, fragments of chainmail, and a single rusted spur, Norman in design, dated to the early 1200s. Taken in isolation, each artifact might be dismissed as a consequence of trade, repurposing, or mere coincidence. However, when viewed collectively, and especially when plotted on a map, they form a curious ring around an ancient necropolis believed to predate even the Islamic conquest. Precisely at its center lies a derelict subterranean water channel known as the Sirab Well, where, according to early 14th century Coptic records, men in white cloaks were once seen chanting in tongues foreign to the Nile. It is at this juncture that the boundary between architecture and ritual begins to blur. Several of these structures, particularly the Red House, bear geometric markings corresponding to celestial angles, strikingly similar to those found in Giza's pyramid complexes. One doorway, sealed with brass studs, aligns with absolute precision to the setting sun on the summer solstice. Coincidence? Perhaps, but the Templars were intimately familiar with sacred geometry. Their cathedrals across Europe echo such alignments, often rooted in far older, pagan cosmologies. The compelling question arises, what were they doing here? It is tempting to frame this as reconnaissance, preparation for an incursion. Yet, the accumulated evidence suggests otherwise. These were not mere military outposts. They were observation points, stations of profound silence, places designed not for conflict, but for waiting. A lesser-known chronicle by Jean de Saintre, a Templar imprisoned in Cairo after the Seventh Crusade, makes a passing remark about a circle of stones that speaks to the heavens, hidden beyond the city of black domes. Scholars have long dismissed this as fevered metaphor, but when paired with the map, discovered in the possession of Hugo de Payens, the very knight whose final letter referenced, the light beneath the stone, a dramatically different picture emerges. Not conquest, but an esoteric pilgrimage. In this compelling interpretation, the Templars were not merely retracing the steps of Christ, but rather the arc of an older path, one concealed beneath layers of conquest, repurposed temples, and crumbling catacombs. And Cairo, built atop millennia of buried ritual, may well have been their quietest, most enigmatic waypoint. Of course, absolute certainty eludes us. Most of these sites are now covered by urban expansion, lost to time, or simply dismissed by official archaeology. Yet a few, like the Red House, still stand silent, abandoned, and profoundly out of place. Should you ever visit, seek out the distinct grooves in the stone. They do not match any local chisel. They spiral inward. Beneath Egypt's shifting sands, Sometimes stone articulates more eloquently than any scroll. Not far from the Giza Plateau, where the immense shadow of the Great Pyramid stretches long into twilight, exists a chamber unlisted in modern tourist guides, unroped by security and absent from official records. It lies partially collapsed beneath a colonial-era warehouse, rediscovered in the 19th century, then swiftly forgotten. They call it the Vaulted Map Chamber. Its story began with a letter. In 1851, British antiquarian Charles Halley wrote to his London sponsor about a subterranean vault west of the Nile. Brick-sealed, faintly carved, and curiously European in design. At the time, Egypt was a maelstrom of frenetic digs and tantalizing whispers. But what captivated Halley's attention was not merely the chamber's form. It was what was etched upon its walls. Faded, indistinct, and scorched by what appeared to be fire, the walls displayed geometric lines and coastlines that corresponded to no known Egyptian map. Here, the narrative takes a dramatic turn, a scrolled Latin phrase, barely legible beneath a tangle of soot and erosion, translated roughly to, from the rock to the sands. The circle holds. Halley asserted that the lettering was unmistakably medieval Latin, and more precisely, Templar, in the distinct hand employed by monastic scribes of the 12th century. The chamber's design also raised significant questions. A barrel-vaulted ceiling, a corbelled arch, wall recesses at shoulder height, as if for storage or ritualistic placement. It was neither Egyptian nor Roman. It was profoundly out of place. Yet, it was the central pillar that fundamentally altered everything. Halley described it as octagonal, highly unusual for that region, with a rust-colored stain on one face and a groove carved like a winding serpent. A brass inlay, since removed or stolen, was once embedded at its crown, and he swore that when polished, it captured even torchlight with an eerie brilliance. Beneath its base, a stone tile bore the faint outline of a cross, but not just any cross. This one flared at the ends, unmistakably a Templar croix pattée. Skeptics of the era ridiculed his claims, attributing them to colonial delusion, a hunger for romantic fables in the aftermath of Napoleon's Egyptian campaign. And when the chamber irrevocably collapsed during a minor earthquake in 1864, burying the site, most were content to let the mystery fade. However, a curious document surfaced decades later. A copy of Halley's notes within the personal archive of French Freemason named Etienne Laval. Laval's annotations suggest he was aware of the chamber even before Halley's arrival. More intriguingly, he connected the map-like engravings on the walls to an apocryphal scroll, referenced in Templar archives seized by the Inquisition. This scroll, he claimed, contained the old lay of the earth before the deluge, an echo of Atlantean myth, encoded in symbols known only to the initiated. The implications are wild, yes, but impossible to fully dismiss. Even now, architectural historians studying fragments of the vaulted map chamber's floor, salvaged and stored in a dusty basement in Marseille, have confirmed that the stone matches no known Egyptian quarry. Instead, it is limestone chemically consistent with deposits found in southern France. How such stone made its way to the outskirts of Cairo in the 1200s remains a mystery shrouded in silence. And yet, there is another layer, an obscure passage in the travel records of Wilhelm von Schahn, a German noble who passed through Egypt in 1224, mentions being shown a Christian crypt beneath the sands, carved with maps that no priest could read. He claimed to have seen knights praying there, silent, cloaked, unmoving. No local dared enter with him. When pressed, his host stated, Only the ones who built that place did not die in Egypt, but they left part of themselves behind. Coded language, a metaphor perhaps. Or perhaps it points to something more profound, something not built for the Templars, but by them. This raises a troubling possibility that the Templars did not merely visit Egypt, but actively constructed chambers beneath its surface. That they carved European architecture into Egyptian rock, not as conquerors, but as preservers of something far older. That the maps they etched were not of the surface world, but of something buried deep within. Caverns, vaults, hidden chambers. One might argue, with sufficient reflection and a dim torch, that they were not mapping the Egypt upon which they stood, but the Egypt that lay beneath. And perhaps that is precisely why this particular chamber bore no record in local legend, no curse, no myth, because it was not native. It was planted, an anomaly, a seed, a place left behind not to be discovered by Egyptians, but by someone else. Someone cloaked in red and white. Someone carrying not merely the cross, but a memory they were never supposed to possess. In the haze of war and the dust of doctrine, some agreements are never formally documented. They resonate beneath the surface, a secret heartbeat known only to those daring enough to listen. Saladin, the legendary Sultan of Egypt and Syria, is universally lauded by both Muslim and Christian chroniclers as noble, brilliant, and magnanimous in victory. Yet, concealed within this legend is a murkier narrative, one that whispers of an accord forged not between generals, but between enigmatic shadows cloaked in white and the crescent moon. The Battle of Hattin in 1187 shattered the Crusader states like fragile twigs. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, once deemed invincible, crumbled within months. Curiously, while Saladin's forces executed thousands of captured knights, one specific group was afforded a distinct treatment. Not all Templars met the sword. Records suggest a select handful were separated, escorted elsewhere, and subsequently vanished from all prison rolls. Contemporary Muslim historians, such as Imad ad-Din al-Isfahani and Baha'u'ddin ibn Shaddad, wrote of extraordinary negotiations preceding Saladin's conquest of Jerusalem. These visits were directed not towards kings or patriarchs, but to secluded cloisters, to abbots, to unnamed emissaries clad in armor devoid of heraldry. One particularly significant meeting, held in a stone tower on the Nile Delta, involved a Templar commander whose name appears in no Latin chronicle. We possess only a cryptic nickname, the one with two shadows. This same commander resurfaces in Islamic records, later seen entering the Mosque of Ibn Tulun in Cairo, flanked not by guards, but by scholars. The implication is strikingly strange. A Knight of Christ walking among imams and jurists, discussing what? Here, the threads converge. Saladin had recently secured access to a newly unearthed chamber near Giza. Egyptian laborers, while quarrying stone for a madrasa, had inadvertently caused a section of a structure to collapse, exposing a stairwell descending deep into the bedrock. Saladin, deeply fascinated by esoteric sciences and sympathetic to the Fatimid obsession with ancient knowledge, personally ordered the chamber sealed from public view. It is believed he visited the site 3 times. What transpired next remains unclear, but within weeks of the chamber's sealing, those mysterious Templar negotiations intensified. Saladin then inexplicably delayed his final assault on Tyre, a curious decision given his strategic advantage. And one Templar contingent, previously presumed lost in desert skirmishes, abruptly reappeared at Acre travel stained, profoundly silent, and burdened with covered carts that no scribe dared to inventory. The crucial question becomes, What did Saladin offer them? A theory, heretical to many but undeniably tantalizing, suggests this. Saladin granted the Templars access to the chamber, not out of weakness, but out of strategic calculation. He understood their profound quest, and he too was intrigued. Both factions, you see, venerated a singular, all-seeing God. Both structured their rites around discipline, secrecy, and ritual. And both, perhaps, harbored legends of a place beneath the pyramids where older truths lay buried truths, untouched by either the Quran or the Bible, a proto-religion. Some whisper older than Moses, older than pharaohs, born not of man, but of stars and stone. If the Templars held this belief, Saladin may have shared it. In return for access, the Templars may have offered something far rarer than gold: silence. A pact that the chamber's contents would remain undisturbed, not stolen. Not displayed, but remembered, transcribed, and encoded within a select brotherhood sworn to guard that knowledge until the stars aligned once more. There's a tantalizing clue. A letter from the chronicler Heracles, a layman associated with the Templars, who claimed that the Sultan bestowed a gift not of coin nor land, but of depth. That phrase, of depth, has confounded translators for centuries. But in the context of this story, its profound meaning becomes clear. The gift was not material treasure. It was entry. Now consider the vaulted map chamber, the strange European scripts in Cairo, the possibility of imported limestone. What if these features only materialized after this clandestine agreement, after the Templars had been granted access and commenced their covert building, recording, and concealing? And then there is the curious case of an unfinished Templar fortress on the edge of the Nile Delta, swiftly begun in 1189, and inexplicably abandoned just 2 years later. Its foundations suggest the layout of an underground archive rather than a conventional garrison. The Templars never offered an explanation for its abandonment. Some postulate a shift in the river's course. Others suggest they were firmly ordered to depart. By whom and why? The Templars' silence on this matter speaks volumes. Inquisition transcripts, centuries later, obliquely refer to the Southern Pact, a term scholars often misinterpret as a political treaty. Yet the phrase invariably appears in confessions involving Egypt, in fevered dreams, in maddened drawings scrawled by monks who perished in chains. The Southern Pact, a clandestine deal, a profound depth, a hidden door. Was Saladin's true genius not merely in arms or intellect, but in discerning when to permit his enemies to dig for him? He undoubtedly recognized that the Crusaders would eventually fall. But perhaps he also believed that certain knowledge, particularly that unearthed in darkness, was too perilous to deny outright. Let them carry it. Let them hide it. Let them be cursed by it. And perhaps that is why, when the Templars were finally dismantled 2 centuries later, they died not screaming of heresies, but guarding a silence they had sworn in stone. One anticipates silence within the Great Pyramid, a profound stillness, air heavy with millennia. What one does not anticipate is graffiti. Yet, there it is, inscribed where no visitor should ever have ventured. Deep within the so-called relieving chambers above the king's chamber, faint, angular scratches of red ochre and soot. Some in Greek, some in Latin, one, unmistakably, in the distinct shape of a cross flared at the ends, unmistakably Templar. The standard academic position is swift and dismissive. Quarry marks, they assert, left by Egyptian work crews, nothing more. But the critical issue is that these marks adorn finished stone, not raw blocks. They are located in virtually inaccessible places far higher than a man could easily reach. And crucially, some of them postdate the 12th century. The cross with flared arms, for instance, is not merely a generic Christian symbol. It exhibits specific stylistic traits employed by the Templars during their late Crusader period. The ends are patty, flared in the traditional Templar fashion, with embellishments more typical of Western European iconography than ancient Egyptian. It was Colonel Howard Vyse, a 19th century explorer and explosives enthusiast, who first blasted his way into the upper chambers of the Great Pyramid using gunpowder. What he discovered was entirely unexpected: red inscriptions hastily drawn on the walls, and among them, a series of foreign letters. He dismissed them as the work of rogue masons or hoaxes, yet in his zealous rush to excavate, he also regrettably destroyed several sections, and the original photographs are, frustratingly, lost. The only known sketches of these inscriptions were unearthed much later in the personal journal of a forgotten surveyor named Karl Lepsius, a man known for embellishment, but also for a peculiar fascination with Templar lore. His marginal notes are cryptically intriguing. In one passage he refers to crosses not of Christ, but of Solomon. In another, marks which speak of the brotherhood in the hollow of stone. Even more compelling is a separate carving, found not in the Great Pyramid, but in the smaller Pyramid of Menkaure. Near a subterranean chamber, a scratch, almost like a signature, appears to blend two scripts, Latin and what might be Proto-Coptic. The translation is approximate, but one phrase is consistently interpreted as "the light is beneath." This is not typical Egyptian funerary text. This is initiatory language, the phrasing of a mystery school. What were European hands doing, carving into these sacred spaces? Here is a compelling hypothesis. They were not desecrating, they were recording. Templars, steeped in ritual and profound secrecy, may have entered these chambers not as conquerors, but as initiates. Consider the graffiti not as vandalism, but as trail markers, a code left for others within their order, a silent whisper etched in stone proclaiming, "We were here. We found it. Continue the quest." It is worth recalling that earlier in our investigation of the vaulted map chamber, we encountered claims of European-style inscriptions deep underground. This is no mere coincidence. A coherent pattern is emerging, an echo of Western script with an Eastern darkness, hinting at coordinated exploration, perhaps even a secret Templar rite of passage. A theory that gained significant traction in the early 20th century suggested that Templar scouts, disguised as pilgrims or merchants, gained entry to Egyptian ruins through gifts of silver and promises of protection. In some instances, they may have even entered with the tacit permission of local mystic orders, exchanging knowledge for silence. This leads us to an often overlooked Templar chronicle written by Brother Matthew of Acre. In one dusty folio, he describes tunnels that spoke in airless whispers, where stone bore the sign of both east and west. The phrasing is maddeningly poetic, yet unmistakable in its implication. He had been inside, or someone intimately close to him had. What these signs collectively indicate is not merely exploration, but meticulous documentation. The Templars may have been mapping a clandestine route, chronicling a passage through chambers explicitly intended to remain sealed. But the profound question persists. What did they expect to discover that was so perilous, so momentous, that they needed to inscribe it upon the walls? A stark reminder to themselves that it was real. Modern Egyptology rarely entertains such possibilities. Graffiti is simply graffiti, they adamantly insist. Yet, the persistent refusal to fully translate some of these symbols, the outright dismissal of Latin-based carvings as mere coincidence, feels increasingly tenuous. We are left with the disquieting possibility that beneath the very stones revered as the cradle of civilization, a parallel narrative exists, one not of pharaohs and gods, but of cloaked men with red crosses moving through torchlit corridors, meticulously scratching symbols into smooth walls as a breadcrumb trail for those destined to follow. Even today, archaeologists working in remote sectors of Giza's subterranean grid occasionally unearth Christian symbols in anomalous locations, but they are catalogued, stored, and then largely forgotten. For what would it truly signify if the Templars ventured to such profound depths? If their graffiti lies not within castles or cathedrals, but within the very heart of Egypt's oldest tombs, it would mean they were not merely crusaders. They were seekers, and someone or something desired that message to endure. The path east from Giza plunges one into the blinding sun. Yet, if you persistently follow it, past crumbling ruins and the pervasive haze of dust, you eventually arrive at Heliopolis, the legendary city of the sun. At least, that was its designation in the time of the pharaohs. By the 12th century, when the Templars traversed Egypt, much of its grandeur had already succumbed to sand and myth. But even ruins retain whispers, and the stories that persist are stranger than anything they could have anticipated. Heliopolis was a sacred nexus, predating Memphis, revered even by the Greeks and Romans. Its towering obelisks once stood as ethereal antennae to the gods, sacred to the cult of Ra and the revered priesthood of the sun. Yet, beneath that pervasive sun worship lay another, far more obscure tradition, one that honored not the light, but the profound rhythms of Shadow, the moon cult of Khonsu. Why were the Templars warriors of the cross, trained in Rome and sworn to Jerusalem, observed entering these hallowed ruins? A Coptic manuscript, unearthed within the monastery of St. Anthony, describes enigmatic visitors clad in white cloaks who appeared in Heliopolis, bearing gifts, posing few questions, and speaking sparingly. They were granted access to subterranean shrines that had long been sealed to outsiders. The text, penned by a monk known only as Chiros, claims that these visitors carried a Marian icon, an image of the Virgin Mary, and reverently placed it beside a lunar altar. Then, they simply watched, patiently awaiting the moonlight. This might initially sound nonsensical, but the Coptic Church has a long-standing tradition of seamlessly merging early Christian symbology with remnants of ancient Egyptian ritual. Mary is frequently depicted in moonlight, standing upon a crescent, cloaked in stars. This specific iconography, marginal in the Western Church, was central to Egyptian Christianity. To some monks, Mary and Isis were not so dissimilar. What the Templars may have witnessed, or indeed participated in, was a hybrid rite, a profound fusion of the cross and the crescent moon, not as symbols of conflict, but of synergistic unity. And that is not all. Etchings discovered in a ruined chamber near Heliopolis reveal something truly remarkable: a figure in Western male armor, kneeling beside a priest in traditional Egyptian robes. Between them stands an altar, atop which is carved a symbol seamlessly combining the cross and the lunar disk, perfectly interlocked like a key within a keyhole. This discovery was initially dismissed by early Egyptologists as mere Christian defacement. However, under infrared imaging, the carving unequivocally appears to predate the Crusades. In other words, it was not added. It was anticipated. So now the critical question becomes, were the Templars following a trail of their own making? or one meticulously laid down for them centuries earlier. It would not be the first instance of the order engaging in syncretic exploration. In Jerusalem, they faced accusations of blasphemy for collecting Islamic manuscripts and fraternizing with Sufis. But in Egypt, they ventured even further. Accounts exist of Templars attending Coptic Vespers, lighting incense in lunar chapels, and posing peculiar questions about celestial cycles, solar, lunar, and even agricultural. And then there's the so-called Lunaria Codex, a partially burned manuscript found in the Templar commandery at Limassol. It contains an indecipherable calendar marked not by conventional months, but by precise moon phases and solstice alignments. Its margins are filled with sketches of what appear to be Heliopolitan ruins. One phrase repeats, "The goddess sings to the stone when the moon is full." This is not orthodox theology. It is esoteric ritual. And if you recall the earlier trail of graffiti beneath the pyramids, you will remember one phrase etched in the hybrid Latin Coptic scroll, "The light is beneath." Perhaps now we begin to grasp the nature of the light they sought. Not the harsh glare of sunlight, nor even conventional divine light, but the ethereal silver-blue glow of the moon, spilling across ancient altars and forgotten rites. A quiet theory, barely whispered even among occult historians, posits that the Templars were not merely seeking relics. They were seeking resonance for sacred alignments, for energy, the kind of energy that manifests only when precise conditions are met: place, time, symbol, intent. And in Heliopolis, the profound alignment between Christian Marian devotion and Egyptian lunar ritual may have provided precisely such a convergence. This was not something they could transport in a physical box, but it may have been something they meticulously recorded, something they swore to keep secret, something that fundamentally reshaped their understanding of the cross, not merely as a weapon or a burden, but as a key. And remember Nicholas Flamel? His notes on Egyptian rites invariably began with lunar references. "No transformation," he wrote, "without first the baptism of silver light." He never set foot in Egypt, but perhaps someone passed the ritual along. Perhaps it originated from Heliopolis, inscribed on parchment, carefully folded within a Templar's satchel, carried westward like a potent spark, patiently awaiting ignition. Heliopolis is largely gone now, reduced to dust and stones, with a single obelisk standing solitary in a bustling Cairo square. But the memory persists, of a temple where the moon once touched the cross, and where knights, in profound silence, might have knelt. You begin to hear the stories long before you ever reach the site. Whispers in the bustling souk, muttered prayers in hidden back alleys, knowing nods exchanged between silent old men with eyes clouded by cataracts. Beneath the pyramids, they say, lies something older than the pharaohs, something not meant for the uninitiated. And even more curiously, they assert it possesses guardians. Not soldiers, not priests, but custodians of profound knowledge. Locals refer to them as the White Shadows. Foreigners once dismissed them as madmen. But the Templars paid meticulous attention. In 1210, a Frankish chronicler named Guy de Volin recorded an extraordinary account while embedded with a Templar detachment in Egypt. His diary, fragmentary and partially scorched, references an encounter outside Giza with a sect cloaked in dust, garbed as the ancient dead who claimed dominion over the vault of the eye. At first glance, it reads like a hallucinatory delusion. But then, the details begin to align. Multiple sources, Arabic, Coptic, and even one Byzantine, describe a group of desert mystics residing in the shadows of the pyramids. They wore linen wraps and carried staffs carved with both Christian crosses and ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. They spoke of a vault, buried deep beneath the sand, which they alone were bound to guard. And when the Templars arrived, something truly strange occurred. They did not fight. They welcomed them. This is not the romanticized clash of civilizations that history often presents. It is something far more awkward, more intimate. The Templars, fully armed and armored, were reportedly led into a series of shallow crypts situated behind the Sphinx. There, the locals performed a unique initiatory rite involving intricate sand drawings, oil lamps, and repetitive chants, invoking not merely God, but the children of the sky flame. This is emphatically not Christian. This is something entirely distinct. One recovered Templar letter, long interred in the Vatican archives and briefly published before being quietly retracted, described the event as a communion of tongues of stars and of time itself. The writer claimed that beneath the Sphinx, he witnessed a chamber untouched by water or time, whose ceiling glowed though no fire burned. This sounds utterly absurd, until you recall the stories from Heliopolis, the lunar rites, the blended iconography, the obsessive focus on light that is not sunlight. But there is more. In 1821, an amateur archaeologist named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt wrote of discovering a triangular alcove in Giza, its walls covered in carvings that appeared vaguely Celtic. He could make no sense of it, but adjacent to the alcove, he found a broken amulet bearing the Croix Patty, unmistakably Templar dot, and then there is the tale of the three silent ones. According to an oral tradition meticulously preserved by Bedouin elders near Saqqara, three foreign men, pale-skinned and cloaked in white, were observed entering a hidden shaft behind a crumbling mastaba. They were led by locals who referred to them as the ones who return. The strangers remained underground for 7 nights. Upon their return, they uttered not a single word. They departed the village, mounted on camels, and vanished westward towards Alexandria, presumably en route to Acre. The villagers were compensated with gold, but not coins, rather ancient-looking scales and weights, stamped with what appeared to be Phoenician markings. So who were these enigmatic guardians, and what profound secrets did they reveal to the Templars? One theory, quietly circulating among esoteric circles, posits that these desert mystics were direct descendants of a priestly class that survived Egypt's collapse by literally going underground. When the Library of Alexandria burned, they relocated their secrets southward. When the Roman Empire fractured, they concealed themselves beneath the sand. And when the Crusaders arrived, they observed from the shadows until they recognized something familiar, a sigil, a gesture, a phrase, something that convinced them the Templars might be worthy of entry. It is not a widely accepted theory. Indeed, it is heresy according to Rome, but it persistently resurfaces, particularly when one considers the Templars' profound obsession with geometry, sacred proportions, and star alignments, all domains in which ancient Egyptian priests were unparalleled masters. Perhaps these guardians were not protecting conventional treasure. Perhaps they were protecting a profound code, one that required the right initiates to unlock. And perhaps that code is what the Templars carried back with them. Not gold, not relics, but a fragment of something far grander. A map, not of earthly territory, but of ultimate meaning. There is even a fresco in a remote chapel in southern France, barely preserved, depicting 3 knights kneeling before a pyramid. Hovering above them is not a cross, but an eye encircled by flame. The inscription beneath reads, Lux sub arena, light beneath the sand. No one knows who painted it, but it was completed in 1253, precisely around the time the Templars effectively disappeared from Egypt and began constructing enigmatic, star-aligned chapels across Europe. So perhaps the Guardians honored their oath. Perhaps the Templars honored theirs too. And perhaps, just perhaps, the vault remains untouched. Beneath the pyramid, beneath history, beneath our very comprehension. Waiting, you are likely familiar with the name Nicholas Flamel. Thanks to a certain boy wizard, he is now immortalized in popular culture as a benevolent alchemist with a philosopher's stone neatly tucked into his vest pocket. Yet, behind the folklore, Flamel was a very real and deeply mysterious 14th century Parisian scribe. Modest, middle class, and by all accounts unremarkable, until something profoundly changed. According to both legend and suspiciously sudden financial records, Flamel became unexpectedly wealthy, founded numerous charitable institutions, and funded arcane inscriptions that hint at something far stranger than mere good fortune. The story asserts that he acquired a book, an extremely ancient book, written not in Latin or Greek, but in a language no scholar could identify. And the crucial twist, he claimed the book originated from the East. For centuries, researchers dismissed this tale as myth, especially the part where Flamel allegedly traveled to Spain, and then ventured further into lands once controlled by the Moors. However, a set of marginal notes discovered in a crumbling manuscript at the Bibliothèque Nationale offers a compelling claim. One note, barely legible, states, "The book came by Knight's hand, who rode from the land of Horus, bearing seal and shadow." That land of Horus is almost certainly a poetic reference to Egypt. And the seal, scholars argue, refers to the Croix Pactée of the Templars. Pause here. If Flamel genuinely received a book from Egypt, and if that book arrived via the Templars, or more precisely, from something the Templars retrieved, then what exactly did they bring out of the desert? A compelling clue lies in Flamel's own writings, in the allegorical images he commissioned for his tomb, in the strange symbols etched above his doorway, and in the inscriptions surrounding the Saint-Jacques de la Boucherie church in Paris, partly financed by Flamel's wealth. We observe recurring patterns: serpents coiled around staffs, suns flanked by eyes, pyramidal shapes topped with radiant discs, Egyptian motifs cleverly disguised beneath alchemical euphemisms. Modern Flamel enthusiasts typically focus on the philosopher's stone, the legendary alchemical substance purported to transmute base metals into gold and confer eternal life. Yet, in Flamel's descriptions, the stone is never solely a material object. It is invariably linked to illumination, to the voice of the flame, and to the eye which sees past the veil, phrases eerily similar to what Templar records suggest they witnessed beneath Giza. One specific image, known as the figures hieroglyphiques, depicts a kneeling man receiving a book from a figure robed in light. Behind the giver stands a temple, its spires curved in the ancient Egyptian style. The figure itself bears no face, only a glowing disc. On the spine of the book is a sigil, two overlapping keys, beneath which is a tiny Templar cross. Flamel never explained the image. He publicly died, or so it appeared, in 1418. But legends persist that he faked his death, vanishing into the east, perhaps to return what was never his to keep. Even his grave was later found empty. So, what profound knowledge could that book have contained? Some speculate it was a transcription of a far older text, a scroll taken from beneath the pyramids, possibly stored within the Serapeum. or even from the scattered remnants of the Library of Alexandria, a scroll emphatically not intended for Christian eyes. Its contents, according to whispered accounts, combined ancient Egyptian funerary rites with something else, an early, proto-Gnostic gospel linking resurrection not to divine judgment, but to the transformation of internal light. Sounds strange? It should. The Templars faced accusations of heresy, partly because of their secret rituals, which allegedly included the denial of the crucifixion, the veneration of a bearded head, and rites involving spiritual transmutation. But what if these were not heresies born from rebellion, but transmissions of knowledge older than Christianity itself? Knowledge buried deep within Egypt, found by knights who dared to dig where they were forbidden. A recurring motif in both Templar and Flamel-related symbology is the Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail, a powerful symbol of eternal return. This appears alongside diagrams of star alignments and pyramids. In a rare Templar carving discovered near Tomar, Portugal, the Ouroboros encircles a stone tablet etched with unfamiliar glyphs that precisely match those in the Flamel book. According to researchers who examined a lost facsimile made in 1891, the book itself vanished, and the facsimile was regrettably destroyed in a museum fire in 1943. This connection is undeniable. Equally striking is how frequently Flamel's works reference themes found in Egyptian alchemy, termed chemia, from which the very word alchemy derives. He writes of separating the light from the dark, of purifying the inner vessel, and awakening the eye within. These are not casual metaphors. They echo inscriptions found in tombs around Saqqara. They echo the rituals conducted by desert guardians in white. They echo the chants sung in the darkness beneath the Serapeum. According to that crusader's account, from ash to gold, from dust to flame, the eye remembers. What did the Templars discover in Egypt? Perhaps not treasure in the conventional sense the Church imagined, but perhaps they found a profound legacy, one passed from priests to mystics to scribes. One intended to remain buried until a man with questions and the patience of time began to listen. You have now encountered the guardians. You have now encountered the scribe. And between them, perhaps, lies the profound truth. Long before the Templars ever glimpsed the golden light of Egypt's desert, a distinct thread of Christianity had deeply rooted itself in the Nile's enduring shadow. The Copts, direct descendants of Egypt's earliest Christian communities, had forged their own spiritual lineage, profoundly infused with the land's ancient echoes. They preserved not merely scripture, but memory. Memory etched in stone churches built from temple ruins. Memory enshrined in liturgies sung in ancient tongues. Memory woven into rituals that felt uncannily Egyptian, even to outsiders. When the Templars arrived in Egypt, they were not merely crossing into enemy territory. They were stepping into a spiritual palimpsest. And standing quietly at its very core were the Copts. Often overlooked in Crusader chronicles, the Copts were neither Muslim nor Roman Catholic. They occupied a unique intermediary position. Yet, according to the scribbled margins of a 1292 Templar travelogue attributed to Brother Aymer de Beaujeu, it was the Copts who served as translators, guides, and, in at least one documented instance, as initiators. Beaujeu's surviving pages are fragmentary, but one entry profoundly stands out. It recounts a clandestine meeting on the outskirts of what is now Al-Fustat, where the Templars were led into a Coptic shrine built atop a pre-Christian ruin. The scribe describes a moment of profound silence, followed by a Coptic elder presenting the knights with an object wrapped in linen, covered in reeds. and warm as if from the womb of earth. That object was never explicitly identified. But what ensued, a ritual involving sacred oil, readings from a scroll written in Greek, and references to the breath that passes between the two lands, strongly suggests a deliberate transmission. Not of political alliances, not of material treasure, but of profound wisdom. It is here we encounter an obscure and fiercely contested account from a 17th century Jesuit record, buried deep within the Vatican archives. It speaks of a monk named Theophilus who accused early Copts of smuggling heretical material to the West, texts that dared to merge Christian gospels with pagan cosmologies. The Vatican's response was swift denial. The Coptic patriarchs, silence. However, modern Coptic historians speak of a different truth. During the Crusades, Egypt's Christian communities faced immense pressure from Muslims who distrusted their allegiance, and from Catholics who viewed them as theological liabilities. For the Copts, survival often necessitated profound secrecy, but it also demanded selective alliances. And the Templars, with their enigmatic rituals, their independence from Rome, and their insatiable hunger for esoteric knowledge, were ideal candidates. So, what profound insights were the Copts guiding them towards? Consider the strategic locations of many early Coptic monasteries. A surprising number are built near ancient sites: Saqqara, Abydos, the ruins of Akhmin. These were not mere accidents of geography. These were pilgrimages of inherited wisdom. The Copts firmly believed that wisdom did not perish. It was transfigured. Some of their oldest hymns refer to Re the Sleeper and Isis the Veil, employing the names of Egyptian gods not as idols, but as powerful metaphors for divine mystery. They did not worship Horus, but they intimately knew his myths, and they meticulously folded them, with quiet reverence, into their understanding of Christ. When the Templars arrived, they posed questions that others did not about conquest, not even about conversion, but about light, rebirth, and the profound architecture of the soul. And the Copts responded, not with sermons, but with stories. There's a captivating folktale, still recounted in some Coptic circles, about the knights who came from the Red Cross. In this narrative, these travelers are led beneath a ruined temple by a one-eyed monk. They enter a chamber carved in intricate spirals, permeated with the scent of myrrh. There, they are shown a box no larger than a book, within which lies a stone etched with 3 overlapping symbols: a fish, an eye, and the ankh. The monk says nothing. The knights weep, then depart, never to return. A folk tale, yes, but recall that the ankh appears in 2 rare Templar carvings recovered in Cyprus, and the fish and eye motif resurfaces in the margin of a codex once owned by Hugest de Payens. Coincidence? Possibly, unless one believes that these were not mere cultural borrowings, but profound spiritual transmissions. The Copts, after all, had meticulously kept older knowledge alive, not in opposition to Christianity, but as its very prelude. They believed Egypt was not merely a land of tombs, but a land of waiting. And when the Templars arrived, perhaps they perceived more than just soldiers. Perhaps they recognized inheritors. And the knights? Maybe they saw, for the first time, a version of faith that stretched not 2,000 years into the past, but 5, a Christianity not merely built atop ruins, but profoundly arising from them. Later in life, some senior Templars were said to enter periods of intense silent devotion after returning from the East. They spoke less, fasted more, and composed cryptic meditations on the desert's fire and the breath that binds the clay. Strange phrasing, unless one understands the Coptic term for soul, nephesh, or that the early desert fathers believed divine wisdom emanated through silence and sand. It is easy to dismiss the Coptic link as a mere side note, a colorful background to the Crusades' louder clashes. But for those pursuing the deeper roots of the Templar mystery in Egypt, the Copts are not a footnote. They are an indispensable bridge beneath the desert floor, outside ancient Saqqara, where the sand mutes even the breath of time, lies one of Egypt's most enigmatic ruins, the Serapeum. This subterranean complex was constructed to house the colossal granite sarcophagi of the Apis, bulls, sacred beasts once believed to be vessels of divine power. Most visitors stand before its immense scale in awe. But for the Templars, according to a little-known Crusader chronicle, it may have been the setting for one of their strangest and most unsettling experiences. The chronicle in question, preserved only in a single Latin manuscript attributed to a lesser-known knight named Sir Roland Duru, claims that a Templar unit, accompanied by a Coptic guide, was led into the Serapeum late one afternoon in 1226. The account is brief and adorned with the kind of flourishes one might expect from a man attempting to sound braver than he felt. Yet, discreetly tucked between its dramatic pauses is something profoundly curious. Roland writes not of tombs, but of resonance. He describes entering a vaulted corridor, illuminated by oil lamps placed by unseen hands, and hearing sounds that seemed to emanate directly from the walls themselves, tones that shimmered like voices devoid of words. One knight, overwhelmed by the sensation, reportedly collapsed in tears. Another claimed the stones were humming prayers. Now this might sound like poetic exaggeration, but modern researchers have long documented the striking acoustic anomalies within the Serapeum. The high ceilings and intricately polished sarcophagi resonate at particular frequencies. If one chants or speaks in specific tones, the massive granite chambers return the sound with haunting precision. Some Egyptologists have even theorized that sound played a crucial role in ancient rituals, though most refrain from attributing mystical weight to it. Not all, however. In 1881, French archaeologist Gaston Maspero documented a local legend that foreign priests in white cloaks once descended into the Serapeum and performed a rite involving what villagers called machines that sing. These machines, never seen again, were said to make the stones come alive, vibrating in rhythm with the men's words. Maspero dismissed it as mere folklore. Yet the parallels with Roland's account are too significant to ignore. Even more intriguing is the inscription noted by the knight near the final chamber, a Latin phrase etched into the side of one sarcophagus. He transcribed it as vocum petimus non mortuos. We seek a voice, not the dead. Scholars have debated whether this was a medieval edition or a misreading of an Egyptian original. But either way, it reveals something profoundly important. The Templars were not merely exploring tombs. They were listening. This moment marks a subtle but profound shift in our investigation. Until now, the narrative has centered on relics, texts, and symbols, objects of faith and power. But in the Serapeum, we encounter something distinct, a search for sound, for resonance, for a vibration that profoundly touches both matter and spirit. And this aligns uncannily with certain profound strands of Templar mysticism. Consider the Order's remarkable silence regarding many of their rituals. Unlike monastic orders of the same era, the Templars left behind surprisingly few liturgical records. Some believe this served as a security measure. Others argue it points to a form of spiritual practice never intended to be transcribed. Perhaps one centered not on written words, but on tone, resonance, vibration, the kind one might learn deep beneath the earth. In chambers built for gods older than memory, there's another compelling thread to explore. In 1904, a young British explorer named Alfred Ryder visited the Serapeum and claimed to discover markings on a sealed door far beyond the tourist-accessible paths. He described these as Nordic runes intertwined with Egyptian sun disks. His notes were ridiculed, and the door in question has never been definitively confirmed. Yet, one symbol he meticulously drew, a combination of a cross and a serpent loop, bears a striking resemblance to a design found on a Templar reliquary recovered in Provence. Are these merely symbols being recycled by disparate cultures, as some argue? Possibly. Or do they point to a shared ancient understanding passed from Egyptian priests to Coptic monks, and from them to the Templars? A line of profound wisdom, not written in books, but sung in stone. It is worth recalling the profound silence that followed this particular Templar expedition. Roland's account abruptly concludes after the Serapeum entry. No further pages exist, and none of the knights named are mentioned in any subsequent records. No battles, no deaths, no burials. Just silence, as though they simply vanished, or perhaps returned with something they were never permitted to articulate again. And yet, in the centuries that followed, whispers of machines that sing appeared in Templar lore. A 14th century poem by a French scribe known only as Alan of the Black Door describes a voice of the sunstone bound in chambers under the lion god. The image is obscure, unless one has walked through Saqqara, where lion motifs persist in faded murals, and granite still hums if you dare to sing to it. Reflecting upon this moment, the Serapeum encounter feels less like an isolated episode and more like a fulcrum, a pivotal point transforming the Templars from mere soldiers into seekers of something far stranger than the Holy Grail. They arrived searching for relics, but perhaps what they discovered was pure vibration. Sound as a profound carrier of memory, stone that remembers the voice of its maker. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is what the Templars strove to replicate back in Europe, in the intricate acoustics of their chapels, in their chanting rituals, in the concealed design of fortresses that still echo in strange harmony when the wind strikes just right. Or perhaps they simply listened, and in that resonance, heard something not dead, not forgotten, merely waiting. If you trace a crusader's finger across the old maps of Egypt, it rarely settles on Alexandria. Yet, in the later decades of the Templar campaigns, something quietly shifted. Records begin to reveal increased travel, more extended stays, and more hushed transactions within this storied coastal city long past its zenith, long after its famous Pharos lighthouse had crumbled into the sea. And this raises a single aching question: what were they truly seeking there? Official histories maintain that the Great Library of Alexandria was utterly destroyed centuries before the Templars arrived. Fires, wars, religious fanaticism, choose your catalyst. But no consensus exists on precisely when or how it vanished. Some attribute the spark to Julius Caesar. Others blame Christian mobs or Arab conquerors. What is particularly odd is the historical insistence on its destruction, as if repeating the obituary could somehow erase the memory. Yet, local legends in medieval Alexandria stubbornly persisted. The scrolls, the scholars claimed, were never entirely lost. Some had been relocated, meticulously hidden, squirreled away in the catacombs beneath the city, or transported east to remote desert temples. or even sealed within subterranean chambers beneath the Serapeum. Yes, that name again. It continues to echo like a buried bell dot in 1247. A Venetian trader named Marcellus de Ateta recorded an encounter with two European knights in Alexandria, who paid him handsomely for access to local scribes. They were described as wearing white mantles and bearing a red cross, almost certainly Templars. They inquired not about spices or port logistics. They specifically requested maps not of cities, but of tunnels, ancient vaults, and dead libraries. What transpired next is even stranger. Months later, a new Templar commandery was discreetly established, not far from Alexandria's crumbling Roman walls. It was neither fortified nor visible from the sea. Merely a squat building constructed atop what had once been part of the city's scholarly district. Its foundations, according to a Coptic account found in the monastery of St. Macarius, were laid over a vault of forgotten gods. Templar interest in Alexandria was clearly not casual. It was methodical. A recovered scroll from a later French Inquisition, yes, the kind that systematically dismantled the order, mentions a confiscated Templar ledger, containing phrases like Chamber of Papyrus North and Keys of the Watcher's Mouth. These fragments make little sense until one considers Egyptian architectural slang. The mouth often denoted a symbolic entrance to an underworld archive, and watcher might refer not to a person at all, but to a deity Thoth, perhaps, or Horus in his all-seeing form. Of course, this is where skeptics interject, arguing that the notion of Templars recovering anything from the library is pure fantasy, that by the 13th century, any remnants were long gone. However, counter-arguments arise from a curious development in 1252, a dramatic shift in Templar scholarship. That year, internal records reveal a surge in the production of codices and illuminated manuscripts in France and Portugal. Many feature themes not typically associated with Christian texts, depictions of stellar alignments, geometries matching ancient Egyptian temple layouts, and even iconography resembling the syncretic gods of Hellenistic Egypt. Serapis, for one. One French volume, now housed in the Bodleian Library, includes a drawing of a tower half submerged in waves, with scrolls swirling in the tide below. On its roof stands a knight, hand outstretched to a falcon-headed figure. The caption reads, "He speaks through fire, not tongue." The implications are tantalizing. Could the Templars have recovered fragments, literal or philosophical, of Alexandrian knowledge? If so, what did they do with it? They were not scribes. They were warriors. But perhaps that was precisely the point. Guardians of something profoundly dangerous, something incendiary. Now recall something mentioned earlier, the peculiar acoustic properties of the Serapeum. Some theorists believe that sound played a key role in the storage and transmission of knowledge in ancient Egypt, not merely spoken words, but resonant frequencies, chants, vibrations encoded in stone chambers. If the Templars had access to texts that described not only what knowledge to seek, but how to receive it through tone, alignment, even ritual, then their sustained presence in Alexandria begins to make compelling sense. The city was not a destination. It was a key. And then there is the matter of the fortress. After the fall of Acre, survivors fled to Cyprus and beyond. But one lesser-known group reportedly returned to Egypt. A 14th century Genoese chronicle notes, a white order of knights seen rebuilding a citadel of stone and silence near the old Alexandrian quarter. No such structure exists today. Yet in 1932, during sewer construction, Workers uncovered an underground corridor lined with collapsed arches and scorched pottery. Among the debris, a bronze amulet bearing both a Templar cross and an Egyptian was scepter. Coincidence? Misidentification? Perhaps, but maybe not. Perhaps the Templars didn't just find scrolls beneath Alexandria. Perhaps they reburied them. Imagine it, an order of warriors transformed into curators, quietly hiding the last remnants of the world's most famous lost library beneath a structure so nondescript that even time would forget it. Not out of greed, but out of absolute necessity, because some knowledge is simply too volatile for an age unready to receive it. The Templars were branded heretics. But if they had truly discovered the mechanisms of the ancient world rituals of soul awakening, starlight navigation, sound-triggered memory, how could they have spoken plainly? Their silence may have been less about mere secrecy and more about profound reverence or chilling fear. And if those scrolls still lie beneath the dust of Alexandria, well, they are not likely to surface now, choked as the ground is by modern buildings, roads, and bureaucracies. But somewhere in the city's forgotten corners, a stone still hums. And maybe, beneath it, parchment still sleeps. Maps can deceive. Or perhaps, they merely reveal the truths we are prepared to accept. In the mid-13th century, a peculiar artifact began to appear in whispers among select Templar circles, never publicly acknowledged, never inventoried, and never, it seems, intended for the scrutiny of church officials. It was described not as a chart of lands, but as a map of depths, not of rivers or roads, but of vaults buried deep beneath the Giza plateau. Its provenance remains unknown, its language a perplexing blend of Latin, cryptic demonic script, and occasional, unmistakably Egyptian glyphs. But its implications, that is where matters become irreversibly strange. The story commences not in Egypt, but in Acre, where a French-born Templar knight named Brother Aymer returned from an unsanctioned journey southward with a bundle of documents wrapped in wax-treated linen. He had been absent for nearly 4 months, far longer than permitted, and bore sunburnt skin, trembling hands, and a noticeable reluctance to speak of what he had witnessed. When questioned, he offered only this: the sands remember. Among his possessions was the map. It was hand-drawn, yet far too detailed to be merely speculative. It depicted a complex subterranean network beneath the pyramids, complete with chambers, stairwells, ventilation shafts, and a long, winding corridor that terminated beneath what we now call the Sphinx. But what rendered this map truly extraordinary were its annotations. Along one shaft was scrolled the phrase, Via Salus, the sun path. Another chamber bore the words Vox Elis, voice of heaven. And above the largest vault, this chilling inscription, Te Set Sacramentum, the sacrament is silent. Most historians dismiss this map as a hoax or a misunderstood architectural sketch. However, what they cannot easily explain is the compelling convergence of multiple independent reports from different Templar holdings describing something remarkably similar. A scribe in Lisbon referred to the burial below breath. A commander in Provence sketched a symbol that matched the central chamber of Aymer's map with eerie precision. A Templar codex recovered in the Vatican archives described a journey through star-locked corridors where the lion waits. All these accounts converge upon one unsettling possibility. The Templars had either discovered or been granted access to an ancient blueprint of Giza's hidden architecture. And that changes everything. If true, it would profoundly imply that knowledge of the inner workings of the pyramids, knowledge thought lost since, The Old Kingdom had survived in secret. Worse, it suggests that someone, centuries after the pharaohs, still possessed the means to interpret it. This would also explain certain Templar behaviors that, until now, have seemed oddly out of place. Their peculiar focus on geometric symbolism in their commandery chapels. The cryptic references to inner light and sunlight in surviving initiation texts, and most tellingly, their profound obsession with protecting what they termed the sanctum of reversal, a phrase that has puzzled scholars for centuries. But what if the reversal they spoke of was not merely metaphorical? What if the map marked a site not just of burial, but of profound transformation? Ancient Egyptian rituals, particularly in their later Hellenized phases, frequently alluded to reversing death, to guiding the soul backward through time and space toward an original divine state. The Templars, having emerged from a world dominated by sin and salvation, may have found in this an entirely different kind of redemption, one not dependent on faith, but on geometry, light, and profound silence. And there is more. In 1264, a ship transporting relics and documents from the Levant to Marseille sank off the coast of Cyprus. Among the salvaged contents was a partially water-damaged scroll depicting a layered cross-section of the Giza Plateau. Experts initially dismissed it as a 17th century forgery until the ink was scientifically tested. It predated European printing by over 200 years. Some of the coordinates on that scroll correspond precisely with ground-penetrating radar data gathered by modern teams in the 1990s, revealing hollow cavities, long linear tunnels, and a rectangular void beneath the paws of the Sphinx. Once thought to be natural, now confirmed as geometric. How did the Templars possess such knowledge? One theory posits that they encountered an Egyptian sect, perhaps descendants of ancient priests, who had preserved this knowledge orally. Another suggests they recovered it from Alexandrian archives, or even the Serapeum, as previously discussed. But the most radical theory claims they never discovered the map, because it was given to them. By whom? That is where the trail thins to vapor. Nevertheless, the ripple effects are clear. Within a decade of the map's appearance, Templar engineering across Europe began to exhibit a distinct shift. Spiral staircases reversed direction. Window placements in chapels began aligning with equinoxes. And certain fortresses, most notably Tomar in Portugal, were constructed with subterranean vaults explicitly mimicking the map's geometry. It is easy to scoff at such correlations. But pause for a moment and consider the cumulative weight. Dozens of references, anomalous artifacts, distinct construction patterns, and personal accounts from knights who claim to dream of descending the lion's throat. At some point, mere coincidence transforms into a resonant chorus. Perhaps the most haunting echo emanates from a late Templar confession given under duress in Chinon. The knight, anonymous in the record, spoke of a place beneath stone teeth where the air does not move. And yet, one hears the singing of light. He then added chillingly, "We were not the first, and we were warned not to be the last." That line has reverberated for centuries. Maps do indeed deceive, but perhaps only when they are misinterpreted. Or perhaps this map, the one that irrevocably altered everything, was never truly meant to be read at all, but rather experienced as a rite, as a passage, as a profound test. If the Templars passed it, they never articulated it. But their silence, as always, speaks volumes. One does not need to believe in divine bloodlines to comprehend their immense power. Simply observe how many wars, marriages, and betrayals have unfolded in the name of blood, whether sacred or otherwise. Now take that potent idea, bury it in the desert sands for a few millennia, envelop it in the silk of profound mystery, and you arrive at the quiet storm that is the bloodline theory in Egypt. Not just any bloodline, of course. This one meticulously traces from Christ, through the Merovingians, to a hidden heir clandestinely smuggled beneath the enduring shadow of the pyramids. Yes, we are venturing into that deeply controversial territory. While the Merovingian theory typically spirals out from France, with whispers of Rennes-le-Château, cryptic parchments, and Mary Magdalene, there is a lesser-known vein that leads directly into Egypt. Some interpret it as a strategic detour. Others characterize it as a spiritual pilgrimage. But a handful of surviving accounts dismissed by mainstream historians as apocryphal or imagined speak of a Templar mission to escort a noble child of purported sacred descent into Egypt, a land they believed could safeguard what Europe never could. At the heart of this narrative is a figure known only as the Pale Prince. His name appears in no official Templar record, but fragments of letters attributed to a Templar commander stationed in Damietta refer to a boy marked by the sign of the twin suns and the bloodline that echoes back to the Nazarene. These phrases are not subtle, and they are emphatically not the kind of language used lightly, especially by men who wore the cross as their life's purpose. The theory posits that the child was taken deep into Egypt sometime around 1210, not long after a failed crusade and during a period when Templar influence in the region was unusually pronounced, accompanied by knights sworn to an unbreakable vow of silence. The Pale Prince was allegedly hidden among Coptic Christian communities, sheltered under the guise of pilgrimage, and eventually brought to a village near Saqqara, home to one of Egypt's most ancient burial grounds. There is an intriguing convergence of details here. Saqqara is not merely ancient. It is profoundly layered, riddled with tombs that predate the pyramids themselves. If someone desired to vanish into the folds of time, this would be the ideal location. Even more intriguingly, oral traditions from that area, recorded in the late 1800s, refer to the Child of the Cross and the Key, said to have brought both light and danger to the region. Some tales speak of foreign knights with pale cloaks and unfamiliar tongues guarding a particular tomb for nearly a decade, before mysteriously vanishing. To further deepen the enigma, a local chronicle preserved in Coptic script, known as the Book of the South Gate, describes a visitor who carried the blessing of resurrection in his veins and was kept beneath the lion who drinks the sun. While poetic, this language bears an eerie thematic resemblance to descriptions found in Templar initiation oaths that reference lions, resurrection, and solar cycles. Naturally, critics have long dismissed these connections as coincidental or wishful thinking. But there is a compelling reason the theory persists, not because of definitive proof, but because of persistent patterns. Patterns that loop back to earlier discoveries in our investigation. We have already touched upon the Templars' obsession with blood, solar alignment, profound secrecy, and the concept of divine resurrection. These are not isolated motifs. They constitute a distinct lexicon, a language spoken only by those who believed they were safeguarding something or someone who could fundamentally rewrite the very script of salvation. There's also the architectural curiosity at Tomar, Portugal. Inside the Convento de Cristo lies an octagonal chapel, widely believed to be modeled on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But above the entrance arch is a barely visible relief eroded, yet unmistakably depicting the boy holding what appears to be both a cross and an ankh. A hybrid symbol, a profound bridge between Christ and Osiris, Templar, and Pharaoh, life and resurrection. Some historians claim this is simply a medieval flourish. Others suspect it commemorates a boy who once carried the hopes of two civilizations. And then there is the perplexing riddle of the missing Templar records. Between 1208 and 1216, a conspicuous gap appears in several regional logs. Entire patrols, crucial supply movements, and encoded messages simply disappear from the timeline. What transpired during these years? Why the absolute blackout? Was it war, adverse weather, poor archiving, or deliberate erasure? We may never definitively know. But the timing aligns disturbingly well with the supposed clandestine smuggling of the Pale Prince. It is easy to scoff at the idea of bloodlines. Most are fabrications intended to elevate fragile egos. But the Templars were not merely chasing gold or conventional glory. They were meticulously constructing a profound mystery. And part of that construction may have involved safeguarding a person, whether real or symbolic, whose very existence threatened to overturn the Church's entire power structure. For if a true heir to a divine bloodline existed, meticulously protected by Egypt's oldest secrets, then nothing the Church had built was safe. So we are left with fragments, stories of a boy, crossed symbols in sandstone, whispers of the lion who drinks the sun, and a secret lineage buried not just beneath the pyramids, but beneath the very narrative we have been told for centuries. The Pale Prince, the twin sons, the unrecorded journey. Coincidence or profound continuity? Carefully hidden in the one place no one dared to truly look. The Sphinx has gazed silently into the desert for over 4 millennia. Most passers-by marvel at its broken nose, capture a few photographs and continue on their way. But what if it is not merely a colossal sculpture? What if it is, in fact, a lock guarding a door that the Templars once managed to open? Modern archaeology often delights in scoffing at ancient mystery hunters. Yet in this specific instance, even the most hardened skeptics exhibit a palpable unease. For beneath the massive paws of the Sphinx, radar scans have unequivocally revealed something profoundly strange. Anomalies, chambers, voids, whatever term one prefers, they undeniably exist. And they have been the subject of both scientific caution and hushed obsession. One particular anomaly, shaped almost like a rough rectangle beneath the creature's right paw, has garnered the most intense attention. Some designate it as a tomb. Others speculate it might be an ancient record chamber. But among certain circles, especially those deeply versed in Templar lore, it is known simply as the Door. To comprehend why the Templars might have sought this door, one must revisit a peculiar string of travel logs penned by a lesser-known knight named Geoffroy de Vignery. His journals, rediscovered in a monastery near Toulouse in the 1700s, describe an encounter with the stone beast of Egypt and an entrance that opened not with tools, but with light and verse. While many summarily dismiss this as metaphor or madness, those intimately familiar with ancient Egyptian religious practices discern something far deeper. The phrase, "opened with light and verse," eerily aligns with the Egyptian opening of the mouth ritual, a sacred ceremony believed to awaken divine statues or mummies using incantation and, critically, sunlight. And what if the Templars, guided by local mystics or Coptic intermediaries, discovered a way to adapt that ancient rite, not to awaken the dead, but to access what the dead had diligently guarded? In the 19th century, before Egyptology became a formalized discipline, a British diplomat named Edward Montreux claimed to have discovered crude Latin carvings near the Sphinx's foundation. though swiftly dismissed by scholars as mere graffiti from Napoleonic soldiers. His meticulous sketches, now housed in a dusty archive in Cambridge, depict something far more peculiar: a cross within a circle, flanked by what appears to be an ankh and a sword. This precise trifecta is not common in any known European symbology, but it bears a striking resemblance to composite Templar Egyptian motifs already observed in other anomalous artifacts. Then there is the case of the sealed shaft. In the early 1900s, the famed engineer Salim Hassan led one of the most detailed excavations around the Sphinx. His notes mention a suspiciously uniform crack on the northern side of the monument, precisely wide enough for a human to slip through, if one were determined. Hassan dismissed it as erosion, but there is no record of what lay beyond. The shaft was quietly resealed. The whispers suggest the Templars found that very passage centuries earlier, guided by desert hermits who secretly venerated Horus. They allegedly entered beneath the Sphinx in search of tablets, said to predate both Moses and the pharaohs' tablets, not made of clay, but of something far harder, stone fused with metal, impervious to the ravages of time. Of course, this sounds absurd, verging on science fiction masquerading as scholarship. But pause for a moment. Remember Nicholas Flamel and his purported transformation? Recall the solar rituals, the profound obsession with death, rebirth, and light. Could it be that the Templars were not chasing mere treasure, but resurrection itself? A secret meticulously encoded into Egypt's stone skeletons. One tantalizing clue emerges from a damaged fresco in Tomar, Portugal. Unlike typical battle scenes, this one depicts knights gathered not around a castle or a cross, but a lion-headed statue partially buried in sand. One knight holds a torch. Another kneels beside what appears to be an open hatch. A beam of golden light pours from the opening, and within it, something faintly shaped like a scroll or a body. We cannot definitively verify the painting's origin. It is unsigned, unreferenced, and displayed in a wing not open to the public. But those who have seen it whisper the same thought. It is the Sphinx. Not as it is today, but as it might have appeared when the Templars arrived. And that brings us to the strangest rumor of all, that before the fall of Acre, as Templar outposts crumbled and records were systematically torched, a single page was sent westward, carried by a writer who never disclosed his name, addressed to no known Grand Master, and hidden in a monastery where no Templar crest adorned the door. The page was said to contain a single drawing: a lion's head, a door beneath it, and beneath the door, stars. If that drawing ever existed, it is lost now. But the potent idea of a forgotten entrance, a celestial tomb, a chamber that only the initiated could unlock, persists. It may be fantasy, or it may be the very key to why the Templars ventured to Egypt in the first place. Not to convert, not to conquer, but to listen to the profound silence beneath the sand, because something was undeniably speaking there. And perhaps, just perhaps, they understood it. The desert does not relinquish its secrets easily. It buries them beneath relentless layers of silent stone and the passage of time. Yet, sometimes, wind and fate conspire to reveal mere fragments, words etched into fading parchment, verses deemed too perilous to recite. And in the sands near ancient Memphis, the Templars may have unearthed something that neither church nor caliphate dared to preserve: a gospel. Not just any gospel, not a canonical text or even a known apocryphon, but one that seamlessly stitched together the teachings of Christ with the sacred geometry of Egypt, profoundly blending cross and ankh, resurrection and rebirth, logos and ka, a manuscript that, if it ever existed, would have irrevocably rewritten the spiritual map of the Templars forever. The story commences with a cryptic letter dated 1226, discovered in a sealed compartment of a Maltese abbey. The handwriting is crude Latin, but with unusual flourishes, loops, and diacritical marks more common in Coptic script. The letter speaks of a hymn in the sand, a voice not born of Rome, and offers a chilling warning. The papyrus burns the eye that reads too deeply. Most dismissed it as mere metaphor or the ramblings of madness. But buried within the same archive, half erased by soot and salt, lies a crude map, more a sketch than a cartographer's work. It depicts the ruins of Memphis, south of Cairo, and a small, crescent-shaped ridge marked only by two characters, XP. Some scholars believe this was shorthand for Christos. Others contend it signified nothing, unless one was specifically trained to perceive its true meaning. Fast forward to a little-known Templar expedition led by Hugues de Blanquefort, cousin to the more prominent Bertrand. While Hugues' campaigns in the Levant are well documented, a perplexing 6-month gap appears in 1227. Records indicate he departed Jerusalem with 20 men and returned with only 6. No explanation, no surviving account, only persistent rumors of time spent in the city of the old gods, and of a book that sang under sunlight. Here, the narrative takes an oddly concrete turn. In 1883, German archaeologist Ernst Wessler uncovered a buried room near the necropolis of Saqqara, not far from the ridge identified in the old map. Inside were charred wooden beams, ancient Christian graffiti, and a few scorched papyrus fragments meticulously preserved in sealed clay jars. One of the fragments bore a peculiar phrase in Greek: "He who breathes twice shall see the kingdom in both directions." No known gospel includes that line. No ecclesiastical text references breathing twice. But ancient Egyptian funerary literature does. The Book of the Dead frequently speaks of dual breath, the breath of life and the breath of passage. Could the author of this gospel have been fusing Egyptian soul doctrine with early Christian mysticism? And more importantly, could the Templars have discovered a complete version centuries earlier? A former Jesuit scholar, Father Antonio Vetti, claimed in 1922 that the Vatican once housed a sealed sermon of the twins, attributed to a manuscript found in Egypt and translated by Templar monks. Vetti's writings were suppressed, his access revoked, and his surviving notes exist only thanks to an anonymous photocopy preserved in a private collection in Bologna. But those notes are chilling. They mention a gospel where Christ speaks not just to men, but to the sun and the Nile, where his parables eerily echo Osirian myths, where his crucifixion becomes part of a grander cycle, death not as punishment, but as profound alignment. Imagine the profound implications for the Church. Such a text would have been heretical at best, blasphemous at worst. To the Templars, it might have been an absolute revelation. A few dusty pages in a jar should not alter history. But this was not about history. It was about power. If a gospel could suggest that Egyptian cosmology and Christian theology were not at odds, but part of a unified continuum, it would mean the Templars had access to something Rome could not possibly control, which might explain their presence in Memphis at all, not to loot, not to build, but to listen, to dig, to study, and to vanish without a trace. And perhaps that is why Blanquefort's patrol did not return whole. Perhaps they read the words aloud. Perhaps they saw too much. Perhaps they believed it. One surviving monk's record speaks of a ritual beneath the palm trees and a gospel read backward under a cliff. Another hints at a burial not of a man, but of a manuscript interred beneath limestone, wrapped not in linen but in lead, covered with carvings of both crucifix and ibis. Of course, no such artifact has been officially recovered, but a private collector in Geneva once claimed possession of a page that glowed faintly under ultraviolet light. It bore no recognizable alphabet, just concentric circles punctuated by crosses at regular intervals. He called it the pulse of the sun. He died mysteriously 3 months later. Heart failure, they said. The page vanished. Even today, whispers persist of a gospel beneath the sands, of a scroll that sang under sunlight, of words that blurred the line between myth and Messiah. If the Templars found it, they did not destroy it. They buried it somewhere, just beyond the reach of dogma. Waiting, perhaps, for the next breath, they waited for the sun. Not just any sun, not merely any morning, but one precise alignment, one sacred moment when the light would meticulously cut a line through stone and shadow, marking a path recognizable only to the initiated. Beneath the sand, beneath the towering presence of the Giza Plateau, whispers recount a ritual known solely to the highest ranks of the Knights Templar. A rite that originated not in Jerusalem, but from the stars and the sun, meticulously traced through ancient Egyptian temples, and conducted in profound silence and absolute secrecy. The account is meticulously pieced together from scattered fragments, some encoded in the marginalia of confiscated Templar manuscripts, others hinted at in the personal diaries of European mystics centuries later. One text, meticulously locked away in the Vatican's Archivum Secretum and described by a 19th century defector priest, speaks of a solar descent in which a chosen knight would enter the earth to stand in fire and awaken to stone. Another passage, dated 1243 and attributed to a Templar named Geoffroy de Périgord, references the pillar of light that opens only when Ra's eye falls in perfect line with the mother's tooth. Now, to most scribes and scholars, this would undoubtedly sound like poetic nonsense symbolism muddled by medieval minds attempting to comprehend ruins and myth. However, satellite imaging in the early 2000s identified a curious shaft, subtly misaligned from the main Giza complex by just a few degrees. The shaft descends deeply, so deeply, in fact, that ground-penetrating radar could not ascertain its full depth due to interference. Crucially, its orientation aligned with the sun's zenith on the summer solstice. Precisely. According to the ancient writings, the ritual commenced days before this celestial alignment. The chosen knight would undertake a rigorous fast. He would ritually bathe in natron salt, not for mere cleanliness, but as one parchment phrases it, to unbind the shadow from the body. Then came the sacred oil anointing, a blend of crushed lotus, myrrh, and cedar resin, emphatically not biblical, but distinctly Egyptian, taken directly from mummification rites and the ceremonial preparation of priests in the temples of Heliopolis. Only the high commanders were permitted to witness what ensued. The knight would descend into the shaft just before dawn. He carried no torch, only a single highly polished mirror shield, carefully curved to capture the incoming light. When the sun broke the horizon, its inaugural rays would travel down the narrow passage, striking the mirrored slab set at a specific angle deep underground. If the knight positioned the shield with absolute precision, the light would bounce from mirror to mirror, igniting the shaft in a golden fire, a test not of brute strength, but of perfect alignment. Harmony with the cosmos, a profound communion between man and solar divinity. A strange coincidence, perhaps, but there is more. In 1817, British explorer Sir Benjamin Compton published a now obscure memoir detailing his Egyptian travels. He described entering a collapsed tunnel near Giza, guided by Bedouins who spoke of foreign priests of the cross, who once lived inside the stone's eye. Deeper inside, Compton wrote of strange wall carvings, Templar crosses enclosed in solar discs, paired with inscriptions of Ra, Horus, and the sacred scarab. One phrase particularly stood out: "He who walks in the sun's throat shall return seeing both worlds." Modern Egyptologists have debated these claims, with most dismissing the carvings as 18th century forgeries or symbolic graffiti made by travelers with overly active imaginations. Yet, in 1999, a French research team, analyzing pigments from a similar Giza tunnel, definitively dated them to the 13th century well within the Templar era. The deeper mystery lies in what the Templars were truly attempting to achieve. This was no ordinary rite of passage. It was not about warfare, courage, or loyalty. It was about profound revelation, about fundamental transformation. There are scattered suggestions in surviving Templar codices that those who successfully completed the solar initiation were granted access to a deeper layer of knowledge, a profound map, perhaps, or a sacred name. Something never to be recorded, only remembered. A recurring motif appears in multiple texts from the period: a knight emerging from darkness with golden eyes. Not literal gold, of course, but symbolic of a spiritual awakening and enlightenment that irrevocably marked him for the remainder of his life. These men were never the same. Some returned to Europe and became silent advisors. Others vanished into desert hermitages. One reportedly entered a monastery on Mount Athos and never uttered another word. And then there's the compelling story of Marcus Dalch, a name barely mentioned in most Templar rosters, except in a letter intercepted by Inquisition agents in 1305. The letter references Marcus, who bore the mark of Ray upon his chest and carried the sun's name in silence. When the Inquisition raided a Templar property in southern France the following year, they found a man precisely matching that description. He steadfastly refused to speak, even under torture. Not a single word. Only when the sun's rays struck the high window of his cell did he finally look up and offer a profound smile. It is tempting to dismiss these stories as mere mystic fantasy, but something undeniably shifted within the inner ranks of the Templars after their encounters in Egypt, a profound shift in symbols, in language, in doctrine. Their rituals became more solar, more geometrically aligned. They spoke less of crusades and more of light vision, the bridge between breath and flame, as though they had undergone something they could not fully explain and did not wish to. The church grew increasingly nervous. Whispers of Egyptian rites, solar invocations, and hidden chambers deep beneath the sands began circulating among rival orders. It was not merely heresy. They feared it was control slipping irrevocably through their fingers. If the Templars had indeed discovered a ritual that opened the mind, realigned the soul, or perhaps even connected the initiate to something far older and grander than the church itself, then Egypt was not merely a detour. It was a potent portal. And like all portals, it demanded a key. One meticulously shaped by sunlight, profound silence, and ancient stone. You would unequivocally expect records. You would anticipate names. You would demand explanations. But what you encounter instead is an absolute silence, tight-lipped, deliberate, and unbroken. Entire Templar patrols simply vanished in the vast Egyptian wilderness, only for fragments of them to mysteriously reappear weeks or months later, irrevocably changed. Their reports were summarily redacted, their accounts sealed, and in some harrowing instances, they were never seen again. What transpired in those desolate stretches of desert that transformed proud warriors into quiet shadows of their former selves? The earliest tale is shrouded in compelling contradiction. In the year 1216, during a lull between crusading campaigns, a Templar detachment was reportedly dispatched eastward from Cairo into the Sinai Peninsula. Officially, their mission was to escort supplies toward a monastery. Unofficially, they were pursuing something far older, an artifact mentioned in an earlier, cryptic letter by the Grand Preceptor of Provence. It spoke of a glass mirror buried where the moon dies, and referenced a whispering circle of stone. Peculiarly enigmatic language for a military dispatch. The patrol never reached its destination. Days passed, then weeks. No bodies were found, no wreckage. The desert had seemingly consumed them. And then, months later, 3 men returned starved, severely sunburnt, and bearing a 1,000-yard stare that no confession could ever alleviate. They spoke only once, to the Grand Master himself. No one else ever learned what was revealed. After that clandestine meeting, they were swiftly dispatched, each to a different corner of Europe. One entered a secluded commandery in Portugal. Another was sent to the remote Scottish Highlands. The third was strictly ordered into silence and took monastic vows under a new name. This was not an isolated incident. In 1229, a small unit exploring near the ruins of ancient Tanis disappeared overnight from a well-guarded camp. Templar reinforcements diligently searched for weeks and discovered nothing. No blood, no signs of conflict, no scattered belongings. Only a single message carved into the inside of a limestone cave. Partially buried in windblown sand, he sees in shadow, who walks without fear. Then came the most infamous incident of all. Referenced obliquely in the trial records of Jacques de Molay, a caravan of Templar scholars was en route from Alexandria, carrying a trove of strange scrolls, enigmatic statues, and a locked copper crate that no one was permitted to touch. They were accompanied by 8 knights and 4 Coptic intermediaries. At some point deep in the western desert, the caravan inexplicably split. Only the Copts and 1 knight returned. The sole surviving knight, a man named Renaud de Lesignan, steadfastly refused to offer any explanation. In his eventual confession to Inquisition authorities, recorded under duress, he simply repeated one chilling phrase: "The desert judged us." That phrase reappears in a curious location, etched in the corner of a Parisian codex, long forgotten until its rediscovery in a private collection in 2004. The book, adorned with solar motifs and strange half-Coptic glyphs, contains a meditation on testing the soul against winds that speak and dunes that bury. Scholars have suggested it may be a poetic reflection on trial by ordeal. Others believe it refers to a specific potent place, perhaps one inextricably linked to ancient Egyptian mystery schools. What profoundly unsettles modern historians is the consistency. Time and again, the pattern relentlessly repeats. Patrols or small expeditions embark under vague orders, invariably linked to forgotten ruins, lunar alignments, or buried knowledge. Some never return. Some return, but are irrevocably changed. And some are entirely expunged from the records, as if they never existed. Of course, skeptics attribute this to the fog of war. Travel was perilous. The desert is cruel. Bandits, dehydration, misnavigation, all plausible causes. But then again, the desert does not typically spare a single survivor, who returns with cryptic warnings and forbidden symbols carved into his very flesh. Ah, yes, the carvings. An account from a French noble visiting Acre in 1274 mentions a Templar knight bearing a scarred cross upon his back, but with an eye at its center and lines of flame in place of arms. He was never introduced by name. He did not speak. He remained for one night and then vanished, leaving only the profound impression that he had witnessed something no man was ever meant to see. A similar symbol, a cross, intersected by a sun disk, and what appears to be a stylized ankh, was recently discovered in a collapsed passage near Dashur, tentatively dated to the 13th century. It matches no known Islamic or Coptic iconography, but it strikingly resembles a sketch found in a marginal note by Nicholas Flamel, who, if earlier suspicions are correct, may have received knowledge trickling down from these very Templar desert journeys. The compelling question is, what could so completely alter grown men, trained warriors? Some theories suggest that deep desert exposure triggered hallucinations, especially when combined with fasting or ceremonial practices. Others believe they were experimenting with ancient rites that had once belonged to Egyptian priesthoods and were dangerously incomplete or profoundly misunderstood by their European inheritors. Or perhaps they discovered something. A structure, a vault, a profound presence. Earlier, we mentioned the solar initiation rite, did we not? What if these disappearances were not unintended losses, but deliberate attempts to replicate or expand upon it? What if deeper in the desert, far from any watchful eye, they were testing the absolute limits of the ritual's power? Even modern archaeologists have stumbled across inexplicable features, straight-line depressions in the rock, too precise to be natural, yet too remote to serve any known function. Shallow steps carved into the stone that led nowhere. Chambers beneath bedrock sealed with alloys no one used at the time. One such location, documented only briefly in the expedition logs of a 1930s British team, described a narrow shaft capped by a stone slab etched with what they termed Coptic Christian alchemy. They did not penetrate far. A sandstorm buried the site within a single day. Locals called it the Well of the Silent Men. The Templars, it seems, knew about that place, and they kept returning. Because whatever they discovered, whatever profound truth they glimpsed in those star-burned nights and sun-scorched plains, was not something they could simply leave behind. It pulled at them, irrevocably changed them, demanded their silence or their lives. Some never spoke again. Some whispered to walls no one else could see. And some simply walked into the dunes and never returned. There's something profoundly eerie about discovering symbols where they unequivocally should not be. Something deeply unsettling about realizing that two entirely disparate civilizations, separated by oceans, cultures, and millennia, meticulously carved the very same shapes into stone with the same reverent care. You have undoubtedly seen the cross of the Knights Templar, red and defiant, emblazoned upon their mantles and carved into battle-worn shields. But what occurs when that iconic symbol begins to blur? When the cross acquires a loop, when it starts to resemble not merely the instrument of sacrifice, but the key of life? It commenced subtly, not with some dramatic unveiling or a long-lost scroll, but with a codex, a fragile volume housed in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, long miscatalogued as devotional poetry. It was not poetry. It was a visual manuscript, a meditative collection of diagrams, meticulously tracing spiritual concepts across geometry. Within its faded pages, scholars unearthed a recurring motif, a cruciform shape, unmistakably Christian. Yet, at its very center, bloomed the unmistakable loop of an Egyptian ankh. One might dismiss it as artistic whimsy. But then, the pattern repeated. A wall fragment from a ruined Templar chapel near Marseille revealed a nearly identical carving. Red ochre paint still clung to the grooves, weather-worn but distinct. Again, the loop not merely a T-shaped cross, but an ankh, stylized and merged with distinct Templar lines. The French ministry swiftly dismissed it as a misinterpretation. But independent researchers meticulously traced similar symbols to over a dozen sites: Templar commanderies in Spain, subterranean chapels in Portugal, and stonework beneath former Crusader fortresses in Cyprus. Of course, you recall the glyph from Dashur, the scarred symbol found etched into a collapsed tunnel wall. Its proportions were neither purely Egyptian nor solely medieval. It was a profound hybrid. The vertical line of the cross extended too far. The loop was too wide. But within that distortion lay undeniable intent. Someone was deliberately fusing ideologies. The ankh, in Egyptian cosmology, represented life eternal, spiritual, and cyclical. It was more than a mere symbol. It was a metaphysical key. Pharaohs held it before their lips in tomb paintings, as if to breathe eternity. Gods extended it toward mortals as a divine blessing. The cross, by stark contrast, primarily conveyed death, yet a redemptive one. Together, the loop and the blade might suggest something far deeper. Death as the passage to true life, and life as a cycle preserved only through sacred knowledge. Now, consider this. In 1306, a Templar preceptor named Elling d'Honor was arrested under suspicion of heretical teachings. His confession, extracted under duress yet remarkably specific, claimed that he had been shown a scroll of signs written in a language older than Latin and shaped like birds and sickles. He stated the scroll taught of a womb beneath the stone, and a god whose eye saw both soul and bone. What truly caught the Inquisitor's attention, however, was his sketch, a cross encircled by rays, with an elongated loop crowning its top. This, he asserted, was the true sign. The Vatican regrettably burned that page, or attempted to, but a copy resurfaced in a Jesuit archive in the 1700s. A theologian named Franciscus Calamot reviewed it and scrawled in the margins, "He is confusing Horus with Christ." That marginalia proved profoundly revealing, because the connections between Horus, the falcon-headed god of vision, healing, and rebirth, and Christian symbolism are far more tangled than one might expect. Horus's right eye represented the sun, his left the moon. When Set destroyed one, Thoth meticulously restored it, giving rise to the Eye of Horus, the wedget, a powerful symbol of regeneration. Now revisit medieval depictions of Christ Pantocrator, the halo behind his head, the disproportionately large eyes, the posture of blessing with the right hand lifted. In some illuminated manuscripts, the resemblance borders on uncanny. What if the Templars were not merely adopting symbols for aesthetic purposes? What if they genuinely believed the ankh and the cross represented two halves of a greater, unified truth? Earlier, you followed the caravan that vanished into the desert, carrying sealed crates and cryptic scrolls. One of the recovered scroll fragments, allegedly acquired through Coptic intermediaries, mentioned the Shepherd of the Boundary, a title later echoed in Merovingian myths and early Gnostic texts. Some scholars persuasively argue that this shepherd was a profound synthesis, a Messiah figure drawn from both Egyptian and early Christian traditions, one who opened not just tombs, but profound memory. You will recall the scar-marked Templar from Acre, the one who bore a cross with an eye at its center and lines like flame. That precise symbol appears again in a stone lintel recovered from a submerged chapel in the Nile Delta. Local lore called it the Key of the Dead, and it was believed to unlock visions not of the afterlife, but of lives already lived, long forgotten, and deeply buried. Which brings us to the suppressed Parisian Codex, compiled by a dissident Dominican friar who traveled extensively through the Levant. One entry speaks of Knights of the Loop Cross who walked backward through the dark to read what time had sealed. He describes rituals involving mirror-lit chambers and whispered prayers in a language older than Greek. He claims they sought to undo the fall of Babel, not through conquest, but through symbol. A profound convergence of divine scripts. Did the Templars genuinely believe they had discovered the original language of creation? That in merging the Ankh and the Cross, they were restoring something lost in the flood of dogma? A papal bull from Clement V in 1307 starkly warns of foreign signs corrupting the true path. He explicitly accuses unnamed Knights of replacing the cross of Christ with shapes of Egyptian sorcery. No one took it seriously at the time, but the language lingers. Egypt was never just a backdrop for the Templars. It was a profound mirror, a cradle of metaphysical architecture, a place where gods walked and symbols lived. The Templars saw in the Ankh not blasphemy, but a divine blueprint. And so they carved it. Not everywhere, but only in places they knew would remain undisturbed. Beneath altars, inside tombs, etched faintly on the undersides of shields. Because what they were constructing was not merely a military order. It was a library made of stone and profound silence. You have followed this intricate thread from Cairo to the caves, from codices to crosses, from the blood-soaked sands to the quiet symbols no one was supposed to understand. But now you have perceived it too. And once you discern the loop on the cross, you begin to see it everywhere. You have likely heard whispers of alchemy, the ancient art of transformation, where base lead becomes pure gold and death gives way to immortality. However, the popular image of bearded men stirring cauldrons and muttering Latin incantations is, quite frankly, a profound distraction. The deeper layers of alchemy, those the Templars became inextricably entangled in, were never about the transmutation of base metals. They were profoundly about the soul. And Egypt, with its enduring obsession for eternity and ritualistic preservation, had already mastered that art long before the word alchemist ever reached Europe. Let us commence not in a smoky laboratory, but in a burial shaft outside of Saqqara. When French archaeologist Clovis Dufresne stumbled upon the tomb in 1892, he noted something profoundly strange. Amidst the familiar funerary text and iconography, one panel had been meticulously painted over. Beneath the faded plaster, they discovered something truly anomalous. An image of a man seated between two flasks, one golden, one black. Above his head hovered the Eye of Horus, and in his lap sat a book with a cross meticulously etched into its cover. Dufresne initially dismissed it as a late-period forgery, but the pigment dated back to the 12th century, the Crusader era. And the book depicted in the painting bore an uncanny resemblance to the leather-bound Resurrection manuscript, unearthed from beneath the ruins of a former Templar outpost near Damietta. That manuscript was never intended for eyes outside the order, yet in the brief window before the Vatican sealed it away. A handful of scholars reviewed its contents. Their consensus: a bizarre synthesis of Coptic funerary rites, Hermetic invocations, and strangely modern theories about spirit replication and celestial mirrors. You have encountered fragments of this before. Remember the scroll Nicholas Flamel allegedly translated, the one rumored to contain the secret to eternal life? It too described something strikingly resembling the eye ritual, a process by which the initiate unseals the eye within, aligning their soul with a higher realm, not through mere prayer, but through precise meditative geometry and deliberate exposure to mirrored surfaces angled with the rising sun. The language is poetic, of course, but the recurring motifs of mirrored light, cross-shaped diagrams, and ritual sleep states, it all powerfully echoes earlier Egyptian ceremonies. The Templars were not merely borrowing Egyptian symbols. They were actively reenacting their sacred processes, reforged with Christian overlays. One compelling entry from the manuscript describes the first death, a state intentionally induced by fasting, profound sensory deprivation, and chanting. The initiate would lie beneath a cross-marked canopy. At the precise moment of solar culmination, he was to be awakened and shown the eye. If he did not shatter, he could proceed. If he did, well, there were no instructions for that grim outcome. What is even more unsettling is that these rituals appear to have persisted underground long after the Templars themselves fell. In 1684, a Jesuit chronicler in Venice meticulously recorded the activities of a secretive brotherhood, styling themselves the Sons of the Dawn. He claimed they practiced a resurrection rite drawn from desert-born scripture and made direct reference to the sacred eye that sleeps in fire. There is even compelling speculation that this group had access to a set of Templar scrolls smuggled out of Egypt through Alexandria, then quietly funneled into Europe via merchant libraries, posing as legitimate theological institutions. Some of these scrolls contained intricate diagrams of human anatomy overlaid with strange star charts. One depicted the soul as a six-fold spiral ascending through geometric gates, each meticulously labeled with a composite glyph of the Ankan cross. But what did they believe the Eye of Horus actually represented? Here is where our investigation veers into the speculative, yet not ungrounded. Ancient Egyptians believed the Eye of Horus possessed not only healing power, but also the profound ability to perceive hidden truths. It was not merely a symbol. It was a sophisticated model of consciousness. 6 distinct parts, each corresponding to a different human sense: sight, hearing, thought, smell, taste, and touch. The full eye represented total awareness, a profound unity of body and spirit. Now, consider Templar confessions extracted under torture, often dismissed as coerced babble, yet remarkably consistent in their thematic core. Many spoke of the gaze, or the eye that watches even in sleep. Some described it as golden. Others claimed it bled light. One cryptically stated, "It saw behind the veil and demanded we do the same." Notably, these confessions surfaced not only in France, but in Germany, Cyprus, and even England, regions geographically distant from one another, yet echoing the same symbolic core. More intriguing still is the rumored alchemical process, allegedly practiced by a select few high-ranking Templars, blending Coptic embalming techniques with elements from the Corpus Hermeticum. They termed it the division, wherein the soul was intentionally split into mirrored aspects, one to remain in the body, the other to journey. Upon its return, The initiate would claim to have seen the stars inside the stone. It is poetic madness, but also profoundly familiar, is it not? A resonant call back to that chamber beneath Giza, where light danced on salt crystal walls and knights returned unable or unwilling to speak. You have followed their intricate trail across continents, but now it begins to spiral inward into dreams, into metaphysics, into something that Templars believed had to be kept silent. Not because it was dangerous in the conventional sense, but because it was true in ways that could not be adequately explained. They were not building immortality machines. They were meticulously constructing profound thresholds. Which brings us back to the eye, that ubiquitous glyph, half-closed, hallowed, perpetually watching. The Egyptians called it the wedget. The Templars called it the flame of return. Modern scholars dismiss both as mere symbols. But what if, just if, it was not merely an icon? What if it was a blueprint for resurrection through memory? And if so, whose memory have we been traversing? The fall of Acre in 1291 marked the final, gasping breath of Christian control in the Holy Land. A collapse so complete, so abrupt, that even seasoned chroniclers described it as if the world had irrevocably tilted. But before the walls crumbled and the Templar stronghold by the sea was drowned in blood and ash, something moved quietly in the desert. Something wrapped in profound silence and secured within sealed chests. Borne not on banners but on wheels, the last caravan departed from an unnamed location, somewhere near the Fayyum oasis in Egypt. According to a single surviving entry in a Genoese merchant's log, he did not call it a caravan. He called it a procession of white ghosts riding under the moon, trailed by mules and covered wagons. 4 guards led, 12 followed behind, all armed but unmarked. They did not pause to trade. They did not speak. But they were observed traversing the Sinai with remarkable speed. Too fast, some claimed, for ordinary travelers. Why does this matter? Because 2 weeks later, Acre fell, and the names of every Templar recorded as part of that caravan simply vanished from the rolls. We are not discussing battlefield casualties. These were high-ranking logisticians, scribes, quartermasters, the very backbone of any coordinated retreat or preservation mission. And yet, after their entry in a minor harbor ledger, there is nothing. No documented arrival at Acre, no exit, no execution lists, just utter disappearance. The implication has haunted historians ever since, because sealed chests were mentioned not once, but thrice by different observers along the route. A monk at the monastery of St. Catherine wrote in his margin notes about a group of foreign knights carrying coffers bound with black iron, who refused the blessing of the abbot and left before dawn. A soldier in Gaza claimed he saw golden latticework glinting through a torn tarp, and a young scribe from Ashkelon scribbled that he saw one of the mules collapse, spilling its burden, a wrapped bundle that looked, in his words, not unlike a child, yet stiff as carved wood. That scribe's notes were preserved only because they were meticulously copied into a broader regional report. But taken together, these accounts form a peculiar picture, a Templar extraction, cleverly disguised as a retreat, moving something sacred or profoundly dangerous out of Egypt, just before the order's cataclysmic collapse in the East. Now, recall the chamber beneath the Sphinx, whispered about in earlier reports. Remember the sealed scrolls in Flamel's vault, the mirrored rites, the Ankh-Gross diagrams, the gospel buried near Memphis. None of these were random occurrences. They were integral pieces of a complex puzzle the Templars believed they had to solve and safeguard. And if their Egyptian revelations were indeed so world-shaking, would they have simply allowed them to burn at Acre? According to one theory proposed by a Jesuit antiquarian in the 17th century, the caravan did not journey to Acre to defend it. It went there as a calculated decoy. The true contents, texts, relics, objects never described in detail, may have been covertly diverted north toward Antioch or even west to the coastlines near Tripoli. Some suggest they were loaded onto a ship named the Sanctum Lux, which was recorded leaving harbor 2 days before Acre's fall, bound for Cyprus, but others point to an even more cryptic possibility, that the chests never left Egypt at all. You see, certain Coptic sources hint at a monastery unmarked on any Western maps. An ancient structure, half swallowed by desert winds, known only in oral tradition as the house without windows. This place, they say, contained a vault beneath the altar, accessible only by reciting a prayer in a dialect now extinct. And even more interestingly, some assert it was built by a Coptic Templar alliance during the waning years of the Crusades, expressly designed to hold a memory too vast for parchment and too sacred for the church. That phrase, too vast for parchment, persistently surfaces in manuscripts tied to the final Templar years, not merely in Egypt, but in France and Aragon. It seems to describe something that could not possibly be transcribed. A vision, an experience, a profound proof of concept perhaps, that the resurrection of the soul, the self, or even history was not mere fantasy, but something once witnessed, something undeniably worth hiding. Why would the Templars go to such extraordinary lengths? Why cloak their final movements in such absolute secrecy, even from their own allies? Perhaps because what they carried challenged not only papal authority, but the very narrative of divine hierarchy. If Egyptian cosmology and Christian mysticism shared a common root, if alchemy, resurrection, and the Eye of Horus revealed a deeper unity of faiths, then everything the Church sought to control would become negotiable. But we cannot know for certain. All we possess are scattered pieces, faded sigils, vanishing names. Still, the path is clear enough to follow. The Templars did not merely flee Egypt. They exfiltrated something. Whether it was knowledge, relics, or memory, they believed it was worth dying for or disappearing for. So the next time someone claims Acre marked the end of the Crusader dream, remind them of the caravan no one saw arrive, the sealed chests no one ever opened, and the maps that no longer indicate where they were truly going. Because perhaps they were not fleeing defeat. Perhaps they were meticulously completing a mission. You arrive at the end of a long corridor, carved not from stone, but from centuries of profound silence. It leads not to a door, but to a compelling question. What if the fabled treasure buried beneath the Temple Mount was not just what the Templars were seeking, but also what they had already found somewhere else, beneath the pyramids, beneath the sand, beneath history itself? The Temple Mount has long served as the gravitational center of Templar lore. From their earliest days in Jerusalem, the order established its headquarters on that sacred plateau, supposedly atop the ruins of Solomon's Temple. For generations, whispers have surrounded their time there, of deep excavations, of midnight digging, of scrolls unearthed, and profound secrets spirited away under the guise of prayer. And yet, despite centuries of intense obsession, nothing definitive has ever been definitively retrieved from the earth there. The deeper one delves, the more it seems the treasure was never there to begin with. But here is the crucial twist. According to a set of cryptic marginalia found in a 14th century French Bible, now housed in a dusty archive in Avignon, a group of Templar leaders, long after the fall of Jerusalem, returned to the Temple Mount under false identities, not to search, but to rebury. The text, written in a nervous, jagged hand, refers to fratres albi d'Egypto, white brothers from Egypt, arriving in Jerusalem during a truce period, escorted by local monks and cleverly disguised as merchants. They carried 3 lead-sealed boxes and a long copper rod etched with markings neither Greek nor Latin, but resembling the curved script of the southern sands. The note concludes with a phrase that defies clear translation. They brought the voice back to where the silence began. Could it be that the Templars uncovered something beneath the pyramids, something they could not keep in Europe? Something too incendiary even for their secretive order? If so, then returning it to Jerusalem, into the very heart of Abrahamic sanctity, would possess immense symbolic power. A loop closed, a profound secret hidden in the precise place where myth and monotheism first collided. Of course, the modern Temple Mount is no easy place to investigate. Politics, religion, and armed guards keep shovels far from sacred soil. But early 20th century British engineers, tasked with subterranean mapping, left behind incomplete diagrams revealing voids and channels beneath the Haram al-Sharif, some of which remain unaccounted for. One particular channel runs directly beneath the supposed site of the Holy of Holies, and one chamber, noted only as unreachable cavity 3B, was described as containing a curious resonance, as if it answered back. That same resonance was described by Templar chroniclers centuries before, when they spoke of vaults that hum and echoes not born from sound. They were likely referring to the very same acoustic anomalies. If the copper rod carried from Egypt was designed to respond to such resonance, perhaps as part of a ritual or a key, the implications are staggering. Rewind a moment. Recall the gospel fragment reportedly found in the sands of Memphis. Recall the solar shaft beneath Giza, meticulously aligned to the equinox. Recall the final caravan, its chests never opened. What if the ultimate purpose of all this was not merely to gather knowledge, but to seal it again, to bury it not in the desert, but within doctrine, by bringing Egyptian revelations back to Jerusalem? The Templars may have attempted a theological fusion, a profound rewriting of origins. In one radical theory circulated among fringe scholars in the 1700s, the Temple Mount became a metaphysical lockbox, not just for relics, but for a fundamental concept, a concept that unified the cyclical death and rebirth of Osiris with the singular resurrection of Christ. A concept that presented Jesus not as the end of prophecy, but as the continuation of a much older ritual lineage. This would powerfully explain the fury of the Church, not merely scandalized by Templar wealth or independence, but horrified by what the Templars truly believed, that the cross and the ankh were not rivals, but profound reflections, that Egypt was not pagan error, but primordial preparation. And so, the burial beneath the mount becomes more than a symbolic act. It becomes a vital safeguard, not against mere discovery, but against profound misuse. Because whatever the Templars unearthed beneath the pyramids, be it text, artifact, or revelation, they believed its power was real. Not metaphorical, not poetic, but real enough to alter the course of kingdoms, real enough to die for. The last compelling hint comes from a monk's dream journal, written at Montsegur shortly before its fall. He recounts a vivid vision of a staircase descending into the earth beneath a dome of stars, terminating at a door with no handle. The door opens not to light, but to music without a discernible source, and behind it, a stone altar, and above it, the distinct shape of a cross elongated into an ankh. You might dismiss it all as allegory, as mere dreams and dust. But remember how far we have journeyed. Cairo, Giza, the Serapeum, the library, the caravan, the mount, each piece meticulously laid in sequence, not by mere coincidence, but by intricate design. And perhaps that design always pointed back to the one place no one dares to dig. Because sometimes, to conceal a profound truth, you do not bury it where no one will ever look. You bury it where everyone looks, but no one truly sees. So here we stand, 23 steps deep into a labyrinth of dust, blood, ancient symbols, and profound silence. And now at last, the torchlight illuminates the final wall. You have meticulously traced the Templars across scorching deserts, and through forgotten libraries, beneath towering obelisks and hallowed church domes, through forbidden rituals and unanswered prayers. And now it is time to ask not merely what they searched for, but what they irrevocably found. Because every sign, every anomaly, every fragmentary clue points relentlessly to one inescapable conclusion. Beneath the pyramids, the Templars encountered something that was not merely ancient. It was vibrantly alive in its meaning. Not a mere relic, but a profound revelation. Let us confront the facts. The Order's earliest missions defiantly pushed beyond Palestine, into territories unequivocally unaligned with their declared crusading objectives. Egypt, despite being a hostile land, became a repeated and deliberate destination. These journeys possessed no logical military rationale, yet they made perfect, compelling sense for something entirely different: retrieval, acquisition, clandestine exchange. Then came the anomalies. Templar fortifications eerily echoing Egyptian geometry. Scrolls surfacing in Paris bearing scripts no European scholar could possibly identify. Graffiti meticulously hidden within pyramids that precisely matched knightly cross insignia. The deeper one investigates, the more the connective tissue becomes apparent, threading from Giza to Jerusalem to Acre, then seemingly dissolving into the vast sea of history. And what was at the very core of it all? Not gold, not weapons, but profound knowledge. Knowledge that seamlessly merged Egyptian and Christian cosmologies. Texts that dared to reframe resurrection as spiritual transmutation, souls splitting as a sacred sacrament. A gospel that cast Jesus not as a disruptor of old faiths, but as their ultimate embodiment. A solar rite that did not merely honor a deity, but meticulously timed itself to a celestial event, precisely mirroring rituals long lost in both Rome and Memphis. And a map that revealed the deepest bowels of the Giza Plateau, decades before modern archaeology could even confirm such tunnels existed. These were not mere coincidences. They were profound convergences. So what was this earth-shattering revelation? It was the understanding that history, your history, their history, our history, is not a linear progression. It is an intricate spiral. That the myths of Osiris, the rites of Horus, the Ankh's loop, and the cross's beam were all integral parts of a single unbroken continuum. That what the Church so vehemently branded as heresy might, in fact, have been far older than the Church itself. That beneath the dogma, beneath the marble, beneath the profound silence, something still breathes. And the Templars, those pale riders adorned with red crosses, did not merely stumble upon this knowledge. They chose it. They meticulously studied it, and in the end, they sealed it not to protect themselves, but to protect the world from what it was simply not yet ready to comprehend. Because power, once truly revealed, cannot be easily contained. Their final act was not to hoard it. It was to hide it. In chests never opened, in gospels never canonized, in vaults never mapped, in profound silence. And if you question why it matters now, after so many centuries, after so much deliberate forgetting, it is because that silence is gradually thinning, bit by bit, word by word. The stories once dismissed as fantasy are now aligning with scientific discovery. Tunnels once relegated to myth are now being meticulously scanned. Rituals long buried are finding echoes in quantum dreams and neural networks and linguistic resonances no one can quite explain. The past is inexorably catching up. And the true secret is not what they found beneath the pyramids. It is why they buried it again. Allow your eyes to grow heavy now. The fire has burned low. The echoes have softly faded. And the sands have diligently covered our tracks. There is no need to pursue this quest further, because those who walked before us have already turned back. Whatever they found, whatever was unearthed in the hollow beneath stone and star, it now profoundly belongs to the silence. You have journeyed a long and arduous road tonight, through corridors intricately carved in limestone, beneath flags of red and white, into whispers carefully folded within scrolls that crumble at the slightest touch. You have stood beside men who vanished without explanation and knelt where hieroglyphs once wept under moonlight. You have listened for resonance in forgotten dialects and traced the Ankh's sacred curve where the cross once stood. And now you have arrived at the end, not with certainty, but with something far stranger, a profound stillness. What lies beneath the pyramids may never be articulated plainly, not in any language we still comprehend. The Templars did not merely bury relics. They buried a mirror one that reflected something older than any empire, older than any church, older even than death itself. So let that mystery now rest, deep in the darkness where the sun does not reach. Let it pulse in profound silence, untouched by archaeologists' tools or theologians' pens. Let it breathe only when the wind moves just right across the desert floor. The kind of wind that rustles linen in catacombs, the kind that carries dreams shaped like keys. The stones remain, of course. They always do. Heavy, watching, waiting. And beneath them, the answer curls in shadow, not to be solved, but to be dreamt. Sleep now in the hush of the ancient, in the shadow of the stones, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, where secrets do not fade, they only whisper.